7 o'clock. Call the meeting to order. Will the recorder please call the roll?
Counselor Soulsby? Here. Counselor Savage?
Here.
Counselor Fleck?
Here.
Counselor Stinnett?
Here.
Counselor Irvin?
Here.
Counselor Robert?
Here.
Mayor Gowan?
Here. Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Item 3 is Tree City of the Year and Arbor Day Month Proclamation. Arbor Day Month Proclamation. Whereas the Governor of Oregon, Kate Brown, has designated the month of April 2022 as Arbor Day, and whereas the Arbor Month is now observed throughout Oregon and Arbor Day throughout the world, and whereas the purpose of this designation of Arbor Month throughout the state is to encourage the planting and care of trees, and whereas trees can reduce the erosion of our precious topsoil by wind and water, cut heating and cooling costs, moderate temperature, clean the air, produce oxygen, sequester carbon, and provide habitat for wildlife, and whereas trees in our city increase property values, enhance economic vitality of business area and the beauty of our community, and whereas this 28th year, Cottage Grove has been recognized as the Tree City USA by the National Arbor Day Foundation, and the 5th year of the City of Cottage Grove has received the Growth Award and desire to continue its tree care and planting and pass on enduring heritage of vital natural resources to succeeding generations. And whereas the City of Cottage Grove has been recognized as the 2022 Oregon Tree City of the Year by Oregon Community of Trees and the Oregon Department of Forestry for the city efforts to maintain and improve our urban forest. And now, therefore, I, Jeffrey D. Gowing, Mayor of the City of Cottage Grove, do hereby proclaim the month of April 22 as Arbor Month in the City of Cottage Grove, and I urge all citizens to support effort to care for our trees and woodlands and support the city's urban forestry program, to participate in one or more of the events that are sponsored of Arbor Month, may provide locally and around the state of Oregon. And further, I urge citizens to plant trees to gladden the hearts and promote the well-being of present and future generations. In witness whereof, I hereunto set my hand and cause the seal of the City of Cottage Grove to be affixed on this 14th day of March 2022. Ms. Newman? Okay, item 4, we need to add a letter of commitment of Vanderbank financing. Mr. Myers?
So you have before you a proposal that we'd like to add as an item on the agenda is to approve the letter of commitment with Vanderbank. So what this will do is it will replace item 8C on the agenda. The resolution needed some more work from Vanderbank, and so we want to pull that off when you get to that item. But we'd like to add this item as item B and then move the current B and C to C and D respectively.
Councilor Fleck?
So moved.
Second. Got a motion with a second. Any discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. Item 5, appearances of interested citizens for items not on the agenda. This is a time for citizens to comment on items not listed on the agenda for a maximum of 30 minutes. Individual speakers must be recognized by presiding officer provide their name and address, and will be allowed up to 5 minutes or less with council approval. Comments regarding any matters scheduled for public hearing may be provided only in that hearing. Comments on agenda items may be taken prior to council's discussion on that item. Council will not engage in any discussion or make any decisions based on public comment at this time. However, the council may take the comments under advisement for discussion and action at a further council meeting. So I have Johanna Z.
Hey, I guess you're in person. All these smiling faces. It's nice to see you all. I'm sure you're not as happy to see me there, but that's all right. I'm sorry. I'm Johanna Z, 1305 Girard Avenue, Cottage Grove. And I wanted to talk to you tonight about respect. I saw the news report that you guys put out, Friday news, that asked people to respect businesses that still require you to wear a mask. And it's a little concerning to me just because there was no respect for people who could not wear masks or for various reasons did not wear a mask. So I'm going to get into that a little bit more, but you're following the OHA recommendations they have no authority. They're a regulatory agency, but they have no authority. You continue to allow businesses to discriminate against citizens here, to treat them as second-class citizens when they, on a whim, decide that they want to continue this tyranny of restricting people's breathing. So these are not laws, but yet you continue to push and break state, federal, and international laws. We know now that the CDC and the NIH put out billions of dollars to specific media. We've seen the contracts for two things. One is to advertise and promote certain so-called vaccines, and the other was to squash any narrative against the promotion of that vaccines. Because I've heard from people who've tried repeatedly to get their stories to be told on mainstream, and they have not. So I've had a busy day, and I apologize. I've got scribbled notes all over here. Last time I was here, Mr. Fleck said he does what he does because he cares about people. And I don't really think that he does, because it's more about fulfilling the criteria for the millions of grant money that has come through, which includes continuing this narrative. So whether there's an actual or potential conflict of interest, we may never really know. I'm going to share with you a little bit about my day today. One is that my brother in his 50s had a stroke yesterday. And interesting, the first question we asked was, which one did he get? Because I have 8 brothers and 2 of them took the jab. And a guy in his 50s shouldn't just regularly be having strokes. He's had surgery and he's probably going to make it, thankfully, at this time. The other is I talked to another local mom because as months ago, someone on this council said that it's so rare that people have severe side effects. I just seem to be running into more and more of these rare cases right here in Cottage Grove. It's pretty amazing. I talked to a mom of a teenager who had to sit with her child being on the brink of death, for months now, and trying to have this teenager stabilized. She's going to come forward, and I told her I will support everything I can do to help her bring a lawsuit against anybody who has promoted this shot. Because imagine just being in the environment, you go into a grocery store and every 10 minutes you're getting the same message, do this, do this, do this. This is programming, right? Operation Mockingbird, MK Ultra, you can look up this. This is programming, and you never hear information. You don't hear information on the other side of it. I've also talked to other people about election integrity and how they're going to spearhead campaigns to make sure that the people who are allegedly in public office are actually the people who were honestly voted in. I talked to another mom whose daughter lost her job because she wouldn't take part in this medical experiment. And it is a medical experiment. Yes, there was one drug that was FDA approved, but it's never been manufactured for use in this country. It is still a medical experiment. And coercion is a violation of the first count of the Nuremberg Code. You cannot coerce someone and push them into taking this. If this 16-year-old person had not heard all of these messages from her school, from her city, she may not have done that. If she had the information or knew that her life would be hell and permanently damaged, she may not have done that. So I spent an hour with this mom on the phone supporting her. That's what caring is about. That's what caring is about. So respect is giving people information and choices, and that's been denied to the people of this community. Respect is reaching out to those who have suffered, not just becoming defensive every time someone stands up here at a city council meeting and just trying to defend your position on that. There is no respect for human dignity. Masks are for criminals and they're for slaves. That's it. Once in a while, surgeons too, okay? And if you're doing something with dust. All right, but now you're going to be turning your focus and your attention towards the homeless situation in this community. Respect for human dignity is not just giving handouts to people, it's helping people learn to stand up on their own and giving them the support to do that and having an end plan, not just providing them with the quick handouts. There's no human dignity in that. So I hope and I urge you that as you move forward on this, that you understand that that's what it means to care.
Your 5 minutes are up, so you need to wrap up.
Thank you so much. I'm so wrapped up. Thank you.
Thanks. Okay, I had Mr. Taddy signed up, but I don't see him online, and Bonnie Sanos signed, but she left. So, okay. So item 6 is public hearings. We have no hearings. So item 7, consent agenda.
Move approval.
Second. I have a motion with a second. Any discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, item 8 is resolution and ordinances. Item A is resolution establishing appropriations within the special trust fund for the expenditure of unforeseen specific purpose donations from Cindy and Ralph Wheeldryer. Ms. Likens. You're muted.
I'll start over. Sorry about that. Good evening, Mayor, Council. A little bit of background. The city's been provided with a donation in the amount of $1,000 from Cindy and Ralph Wheeldryer. The donation is to be used specifically to provide assistance to people in the community that are unhoused. If the funds are not spent in the current fiscal year, the trust fund maintains the integrity of the purpose of the donation and is carried forward to the next fiscal year to be appropriated and available for expenditure. In order to lawfully spend the money this fiscal year, the city must comply with the requirements of the local budget law. Expenditures in the year of receipt of grants, gifts, bequests, or devices transferred to the local government and trust for a specific purpose may be made after enactment of a resolution or ordinance authorizing the expenditure. Staff is recommending that the City Council adopt the resolution to establish appropriations for the use of the donated funds for the purpose stated in the amount of $1,000.
Do we have a resolution number?
2064.
Councilor Fleck.
Mr. Mayor, move that the council adopt resolution 2064.
Second. Have a motion with the second. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, will the recorder please call the roll?
Councillor Soulsby? Aye. Councillor Savage? Aye. Councillor Fleck?
Aye.
Councillor Stinnett?
Aye.
Councillor Irvin?
Aye.
Councillor Roberts?
Aye.
Mayor Gowling?
Aye. Okay, resolution 2064 passes. We will go to item B, resolution supporting downtown Cottage Grove applications for Oregon Main Street Revitalization Grant for Riverside 303 East Main Street. Councilor Savage.
Thank you. I would like to declare an actual conflict and I will recuse myself. Thank you.
Oh, I'm so sorry. So what you need to do is explain into the records so that the city recorder can determine what is the source of that actual conflict.
Not a problem.
Thanks.
It is the company that I work for that is applying for the grant. Thank you.
And so just to clarify, that is an employer of a decision maker is receiving funds or would receive funds based on the vote.
And as a program administrator downtown Cottage Grove, I'll also be recusing.
And I just want the minutes to reflect that's also an actual conflict of interest.
Okay. So is this resolution 2065?
Correct.
And Mayor,
Oh.
Faye is in Benita tonight,
Okay.
meeting with the city council there.
Is Mr. Mongan doing this one or?
I was going to do it.
Okay.
But Eric, are you? I can talk to Faye about just.
Okay. Mr.
So,
Myers.
What this is a resolution to support the grant application that is being submitted on behalf of downtown Cottage Grove and for the River's Edge project at 303 Main Street. The city will act as the fiscal agent. The grant will come through us from the state of Oregon's Main Street program, and then would be dispersed as the improvements are made on the property. Downtown Cottage Grove will also receive a portion of the administration fees as well to do record keeping and bookkeeping for the project. It's a $200,000 grant. We have been successful in the community in the past for doing that. And it's to fix up 303 and to fix the facade to make it look more incoming with the downtown, as well as open up the building and create a inviting atmosphere that will open into the river and to the Centennial Covered Bridge and Historic Main Street Bridge.
Councilor Irvin.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. To just reiterate some of my comments or concerns that brought up on the agenda session meeting. One is that, every building in downtown represents this cultural core and center of Cottage Grove, and so it has an effect on anything that goes on in the future and what we attract and who we become. And so to that end, I know you mentioned some of the opportunities, but you reiterate some of the opportunities for public comment as this goes through, I think, the historic commission. And then another thought that I had adjacent to that would be what could you kind of speak to the historic restrictions on that site? I know there's a setback from the river riparian area, but what is the nature of the historic? What is the historic nature of that building? What is it?
And Eric can probably answer that a little more, but basically it's in the district. I don't think this building has any specific criteria as a historic building, but it is contributing to the district. And so it will have some of those contributing features that it has to meet when it goes through the Historic Preservation Commission.
It's like practically, what would that look like? They couldn't just do any sort of facade, or they.
Right. There's going to be, there's restrictions that they don't want them to make it look like too much of the historic building. They don't want it to try to take over and assume that, but if it's something that contributes, it's got the same kind of materials, the same kind of lines and definitions of buildings in the area, just so it doesn't, they don't want to make it historic in that it's going to take corrugated metal that's rusted and put it on the siding and doing that. It needs to be something in line with the more masonry work and those kind of pieces. Yeah.
Does it restrict additions or cantilevered roofs or patio areas or going up or skywalks or anything like that?
To some extent it could, if those get into distracting from the historic nature of the district. But it doesn't require some of those things as well. Awnings, things that would be a part of what would have been in the historic district would be acceptable. But lined neon lights all around with chaser lights and things like that would not be appropriate. No, Eric, do you have anything else to add?
I would just add that I think you've touched on all the things there, Richard. There's basically what the historic preservation overlay would prohibit is the Popeyes architecture style or maybe Verizon's architecture style. There are some other examples that I've seen where you could have a glass facade on a building within a historic district, such as that it reflects the adjacent architecture, historic architecture, but generally, as Richard said, it's the intent is to mimic but not overshadow. Yeah.
So they could take and do a glass front and then put maybe some brick-looking arches or something that carry that look of, but not be forcing that look of historic.
If I might, final question on that would be who is the body or who is the deciding interpreter of said?
That would be the
guidance?
Historic Preservation Commission would look at it and make that determination. And then if there's anything that needs to go, I don't know if it needs to go to the Planning Commission as well, but no, it doesn't. So that would be the body that would make those determinations. The Historic Planning Commission is made up of members in the community that actually have some history or tie to historical preservation. So they're just not somebody on the street that doesn't know about historic preservation. They have some tie in history to museums or to architecture training or something like that.
Councilor Roberts.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Craig, 1952 was when that building was built originally.
I'm Greg.
Huh? Yeah, 1952. Rebuilt in 1973. I didn't know what to think of this when it first came forward, but then there's two words in here that really stuck with me on it, and that is economic revitalization. And I really think that is important. That's the goal of what we're trying to do to our downtown, is to bring people here. And I think a restaurant, 12 years ago when I went through my cancer, I used to walk down Main Street and spend time along the riverbank. I always thought that lawn out there would make just one of the best places for a restaurant in our community. So I do support this. The only question I have, it says after a thorough vetting, they chose to support this grant application. How many people did file else besides Blackstone Inc.?
I believe it was 4 or 5, but you might need to ask Jim Gilroy, who's here from the Downtown Cottage Grove organization. He could probably answer that. I see Eric's nodding his head that it was that number, but Jim could probably tell you for sure how many applications they had.
I just wanted to see that other people were vying for that.
Yeah, and they put it out and asked for
possibly who they are. All right, I'll look into that in the future. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. That was all I had.
Councilor Fleck.
Well, I'm excited. The grants we've received from SHPO have been incredible over the years. We've seen a lot of projects, and I wholeheartedly support that. And with that, Mr. Mayor, I'll move that the council adopt resolution 2065.
Second.
I have a motion with a second. Is there any more discussion?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I would just like to say I'm in full support of this as well. I've seen the plans and they're beautiful. So I think it'll be a great addition to Cottage Grove.
With that, will the recorder please call the roll?
Counselor Soulsby? Aye. Counselor Savage? Counselor Fleck?
Aye.
Counselor Stinnett? Counselor Irvin?
Aye.
Counselor Roberts?
Aye.
Mayor Gowdy?
Aye. Yeah. So item C, we will remove, and we will talk about that in item 9B. And Ms. Santos ran home and got her notes, so I'm going to go back up to item 5 and let her have her 5 minutes to speak. And then I've seen Mr. Taddy's online, and I'll give him his 5 minutes as well.
Thank you, Mr. Bauer. I apologize for leaving them on the table. My name is Bonnie Sano, and my home is Cottage Grove. Several weeks ago, I was told that you all wanted to know about detrimental effects of the COVID injections. So I shared how it negatively affected my daughter's 20-plus year career. Later, I shared the adverse effects my local anonymous friend gave me to read. I have one more local account that I was given to read to you. I think, though, that I must have been given misinformation about your interest in these matters, because you don't seem to be interested at all. In fact, what I have observed since coming to these meetings is that you are primarily interested in, number 1, following the governor's personal mandates, number 2, housing the homeless who have come into our community, and number 3, hiring a well-paid engineer. Meanwhile, the city streets, like the continuously potholed North 16th and Old City water pipes with their 1-inch thick sediment, badly need attention. From what I personally have seen and heard here around town and on Facebook,
You are much more interested in providing for the homeless and the tourists than for the tax-paying citizens. This is what I was given to read to you a couple of weeks ago. I am writing this anonymously. While taking the time to decide if I was going to get the COVID vaccine, I had a very good friend who worked for one of the companies distributing the shot, who told me she witnessed many horrible things, including several parents holding down and forcing their children of all ages to get the vaccine, but also workers who would pretend to vaccinate individuals, squirting out the toxic substance and jabbing them. This made me really question what was going on, and is one reason I have chosen to wait to see what happens before I make such a big decision. But because I decided not to jump right in with this experiment, I have had to deal with so much harassment and discrimination. I live here in Cottage Grove. I look to you guys as the leadership to do what is right, but we feel ignored. You cannot ignore us anymore. Help us. She prepared this a few weeks ago, and I was to read it about last week.
Thank you. Mr. Taddy? Mr. Taddy, if you can hear us, you can, there you go.
Good evening, Mayor. I tuned in a little bit late. Is this the 5 minutes public comment, or is this regarding a certain issue?
I thought you wanted comments on items not on the agenda.
Yeah, I did. I'd like to speak to is Dwayne Taddy, 77561 Highway 99, unincorporated Cottage Grove. I'd like to speak to the homeless issue. Again, I want to reinforce to the council and the mayor that there was a spot that was supposed to be opened up, a dusk to dawn spot that was supposed to be opened up so that we could have comply with that Ninth Circuit decision so that we wouldn't be violating anybody's civil rights. We need to revisit that. The city of Cottage Grove needs just a simple, safe place for these people to go so that we don't violate their rights and find ourselves in any trouble and bankrupt the city. The other thing I wanted to do was remind the city council about the possibility of creating a prepared food tax to help pay for the shortfalls that may come in the budget because of the road conditions, deteriorating roads, and also the chance that there may be less gas sold in the city because of the price of gas, and there's going to be a shortfall that Richard talked about on the radio. Gas has cost more, and chemicals are costing more. Anyways, I wasn't prepared to speak here. I thought that I had missed the beginning of the meeting. So thank you for your time.
Thank you. Okay, item 9A is South Lane Community Health Clinic. Mr. Myers.
Tonight we have Jim Gilroy here from the Be Your Best Committee, and he is here, and from Lane County, our Lane County Public Human Health and Services Director, and
I can do that for you, Richard,
okay,
if you like.
And I'll move and get your power.
Okay, thanks. I'm Jim Gilroy. I live at 946 Blue Sky Drive, Cottage Grove. And with me tonight, I'm fortunate to have a group of people that you'll see in the story we're about to tell have made all the difference in us coming to this point in our effort. And so I have March Hamilton, who's president of Lane Community College, Brian McCaslin, who's assistant superintendent of South Lane Schools, and then Eve Gray, who's director of Health and Human Services for Lane County. And I noticed Heather Buck was up here on the screen earlier. I don't know if you're still there, Heather, but there she is. Yeah, good.
I am.
And if there's anyone else that's a part of the committee, all I see is some initials, so I'm not sure who's there. But go ahead and announce yourself if you'd like to. All right. These are the people that I knew were committed to being here tonight. And so I wanted to, first of all, tell you it's really all your fault. This whole thing's about what the council decided to do 15 years ago when they set up a strategic plan. In fact, Richard Myers, I would say, was probably the chief author of the concept along with his staff at the time. And the council, some of which may have not have been on the council at that time, set in place the motion to decide what are we going to be like as a community 50 years from now, actually 30, but even further on. And when that happened, one of the top items that came out of that strategic planning session was community health. Imagine that. I mean, everyone always talks about other things, but never about health. And yet, somehow, the community responded, and it became a top item in the Vision Keepers' efforts to provide ongoing acknowledgement of what we're trying to do in the community. So now, fast forward a few years, and you had Tom Wheeler from South Lane Mental Health, who, by the way, grew an organization from one person to about 100 employees in the community, and set up probably one of the best mental health agencies in the state of Oregon. And you had people like Jody Volnick, who helped him do that with her grant writing. Jackie Lester, who was very involved through the school district initially. And then there was Amy Callahan Tracewell. She actually got me involved in Be Your Best. And she was working as the foundation director for Peace Health here in the community at the time. And of course, Peace Health's goal is health. And that made one of their top priorities to find out ways that Peace Health could be a contributor to that effort. Well, I wanted you to look at the logos up there. You've got the Lane County, you've got Be Your Best, which is made up of a lot of local organization leadership and all the local organizations, nonprofits, and medical community. You have Lane Community College, Peace Health, South Lane Mental Health, and of course, South Lane School District. And I think the thing I would point out there is that it's very seldom that I've been part of a group that actually had a common goal, and that was to provide for all people here in South Lane County the access to good health care. And so with that, Richard, go ahead. So the overview, project overview and partners. Why is the Community Health Center important and who will it serve? Programs and services and the career technical education components, project budget and committed funds, and request for funding from the city. So that's what we're going to cover in a few minutes here. Okay, Richard. South Lane Community Health Center. Create Community Health Center of Lane County, runs single site integrated health center offering primary, behavioral, oral health care to residents of South Lane and North Douglas counties. Look at that. I mean, that's our market area. If Sean and I were here from the chamber, she would agree, because those are the people that come here to shop, and those are the people that we're interested in making sure they have good health. The project is an expansion of the Lane County's community health centers and an FQHC, which is federally qualified health care, which is it makes it possible for all people to get health care as needed. And offering real-world learning and training for local high school and college students interested in healthcare careers. This is one of the most attractive features to this project. Remember now, Lane County has 6 urban metro area health centers, no rural. So when Heather Buck and all her commissioners heard our presentation a few years ago, I think they saw an opportunity to really get behind the local people to build this health center in a rural community. And that's why they said yes, it was unanimous. And because of that, we're at this point. Okay, Richie. The project is a collaboration between Lane Community College, Lane County, South Lane School District, Be Your Best, Peace Health, and South Lane Mental Health. Next. South Lane designated as a health professional shortage area for primary and dental care. So this explanation is why we think it's needed and why it'll make a difference in the way we live here. In fact, will be an attraction for people to want to be here. 2 of the top 6 primary care service areas with the highest level of unmet need in Oregon. The community's need surpasses local provider capacity. Peace Health, Cottage Grove Community Medical Clinic has the highest rate of emergency department use for oral health. 3,500 to 4,000 local patients travel to Eugene, Springfield for care forego care. And that's really an issue that, how do you measure that, large service gaps left in South Lane with closing of services and then the great community support for the project. Next. Responding to community need, who will the CHC serve? As a FQHC, the project will serve all members of the community regardless of race, gender, age, preferred language, sexual orientation, housing, insurance status, or ability to pay. Approximately 1 in 4 Cottage Grove residents and almost 1 in 2 local families with children under 5 live below the federal poverty level. Among FQHC patients, 3 in 4 had family incomes below FPL. 2 in 5 were children under 18, and 7% were 65 or older. Expected to be the medical home for up to 5,000 individuals with 4 primary care practitioners at capacity. Now, the program services. Primary care service for adults, children, and adolescents, family practice, internal medicine, pediatrics, family planning, integrated behavioral health, alternative medical services, pharmacist consultations. I can't even read the number. It's a 3408 program supporting access to low-cost medications and support for South Lane School District students and staff health needs. That's on the primary care. Dental, integrated oral health. Now, a lot of you are familiar with the dental program that we have already with the school district at LCC. And that's going to continue until we get to the point, I'll explain a little later, of actually increasing the healthcare, not only to students, but to all people. And then full service dental services, that's what I'm speaking to. Next dot is public health, WIC, maternal and child health. And then, of course, career and technical education. Next. So it's going to be co-located with LCC classrooms on the LCC Health Careers campus, located at 1275 South River Road, and all of you have been there, I know. And then right next door is our own high school. I mean, what are the chances? You could have a setup like that. That was already, it's like it was planned. Okay, go ahead, Richard. Projected employment at full capacity, year 3 to 4. So primary care providers would be 4 full-time, dentists 1, medical support staff, RNs, LPNs 8, dental hygienists 2, pharmacists 0.2, behavioral health clinician 1, and administrative staff, which is 5. So the total employed staff at the point in 3 to 4 years will be 21 FTEs. And Lane County will actively pursue job applicants in the local community. In fact, I've actually had calls from providers that want to be associated with that from out of the area. They've already heard about it. And the one I had specifically was from Roseburg. All right, go ahead, Richard. High school CTE education, and it really is unique, and what an opportunity. South Lane School District is involved in a countywide advisory group that provides the healthcare perspective as we continue to grow our program. Meaningful internship opportunities in the healthcare and business fields. Increased collaboration with LCC to include additional classes and trainings for both high school students and members of our community. And medical provider classroom in the building that has the necessary training equipment. Thank you. Next. CTE educational. Future students, on-ramp for high school students, career exposure, job shadowing, dual credit health profession opportunities. Excuse me. Current students, internship, clinical practice, on-the-job training opportunities in an active clinic, including dental, nursing, LPN, medical assistants, medical reception, etc., and stackable credential opportunities, in other words, career ladders. Other training, workforce training for health careers connected with larger health partners, CNA, phlebotomy, etc. And then finally, continuing education partnership with the clinic and local healthcare professionals. Local economic impact. Career laddering opportunities for higher wage jobs and hard to recruit health career categories. Let me tell you, if you don't, you've read it on a daily basis, and you may have even felt it through things that have happened in your own family, but it's really hard to find people that want to work, that can work, that are wanting to go into this field. They're exhausted. Excuse me. Immediate relief from indigent care spending. So this is an example of how, while you see some of these partners here, it makes economic sense. So South Lane Mental Health spends approximately $300,000 annually at indigent care. Peace Out Cottage Grove only spent $1.2 million on charity care over the previous pre-pandemic year. And then keeping healthcare local keeps spending local. So currently, 3,500 to 4,000 local residents utilize the clinics in Eugene, Springfield, and then of course local employment. Current funds committed. Oh, it's hard to read, but I'll do my best. I'm just going to say we have a total commitment of almost 4.5 million, and you can see the list there. OCF, YARG, which is a local foundation that comes out of the Moots and Gray family. Some of you have, I know, participated in selecting people for scholarships and so forth. Coast Fork Fund of Oregon Community Foundation, LCC Bond, Peace Health, Trillium, Lane County, Pacific Source, OCF, Three Rivers Foundation, federal dollars, which just came in last week, 1.5 million, and state funds that were just awarded to us of 250,000. So we have 4.5 million already committed. Next. These are some other potential funders. The Ford Family Foundation has expressed strong interest in us. Wooded Foundation, Stewart Foundation, Cow Creek Umpqua Indian Foundation, Weyerhaeuser Foundation, Pacific Power, and the Roundhouse Foundation. Those are some potential funders there. Next, please. Phase 1, estimated budget. I'm sick. I'm sick because the costs. Anyone have to do anything with your house? Or the costs in the last 6 months alone are making it really challenging. Well, when we started this, remember, it was about 3 years ago that we actually got permission from the county to start. Had COVID not interrupted, we would have been open a year ago last January. So think about the costs that have risen over that time period. And even some of the funders, I need to be clear about this. We're very generous in what we have. They actually promised more. And then COVID hit, half their money went somewhere else because they needed to either survive as an organization or provided care for people that had nothing. And so that's where our gap kept growing as opposed to being open, which is what our goal was. So we want to renovate the LCC building to accommodate the community health center, including the full roof renovation. This includes the availability of gender-neutral restrooms inside the clinic. Clinic will be approximately 8,400 square feet. There'll also be one large classroom space. So you can see the difference between what we've acquired in terms of commitments and also what the actual cost is for phase 1. And phase 1 is everything but dental. So phase 1 funding gap is about 200,000. Go ahead, Richard. Phase 2 estimated budget, which is the dental area. This plan includes the continued operation of the current dental clinic. So it's about $1 million, and the funding gap to complete phase 1 and 2 together is 1.2 million. And that's as of just a week ago, but you don't need too much to realize that it's probably gone up even more in the last week. Go ahead, Rich. What's our construction timeline? Phase 1 construction will begin when funds to cover phase 1 are committed. It's looking like we'll break ground on the project in August. That allows for the architects drawings, the bids to come in and selection. And they figure by midwinter, early spring, it'll be open. That's the goal as of last week. We updated it as of last week. Go ahead, Richard. What is the plan for community engagement, feedback, and input? Well, Lane County is committed to an ongoing community input and collaboration, including Be Your Best, the South Lane School District, and others. The center will be run by Lane County's Community Health Center as a federally qualified health center. Now, this is really key here because the county, when they said, yes, we're going to have a health center in Cottage Grove, but you have to build it. And then once it's built, it goes back to the county and the county runs it. And you can see what happens. The Community Health Advisory Board oversees and directs the community health centers in conjunction with the Board of Commissioners and includes community members and board members. So in the end, we have an agency who has the one major purpose, public purpose, which is health in the public arena. They will be the ones to continue on with this health center for us. And so it's not like we're building something that will disintegrate over time. It's going to be enhanced and built to last. And Richard. And so we'd ask you to join us. And if you'd like to ask me questions, I'm here. And all my compatriots are with me.
Councilor Fleck.
So I guess my first question is for Richard and the timing of the ARPA funds. Because they're in two phases, right? We have one this year and one next.
Right. And what we have on the calendar is we have scheduled next council meeting to actually go over the priorities that we've looked at in the past for ARPA and how those may have adjusted and what has been spent. And so we can bring this request into that next council.
Councilor Irvin.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Can you delve in a little deeper to what you mean by family planning services? That I remember this. I don't remember the list of services coming up in the initial question for support.
Okay, it's a good question, Greg. I'm going to turn to my Director of Health and Human Services, Eve Gray, and ask, would you join me up here, Eve? And if you know specifically, could you hear us?
Sure. Most commonly what we do is offer no-cost birth control and advice to folks who are wanting to plan their families either now or not now.
Okay, right.
Meaning birth control services. So we do provide no-cost birth control. We don't provide abortion services.
But point of order, Mr. Mayor, this isn't time for public comment.
Well, that was my question. Is it providing abortion services? I was concerned about that, especially with proximity to the high school right there. So that's a no abortion services.
We don't provide abortion services. No.
Other questions?
Thank you. Councilor Stennett.
Can you go into, Richard, a little more about what the timing of the ARPA funds means for financial feasibility of us to be able to help out with this project?
We've received the first tranche, or the first payment of the ARPA funds. So we have cash on hand to be able to use. We just haven't put it into the budget expenditure lines yet, and we'll fix that after we do the priorities. But at the next meeting, we can go over those priorities and look at where and what things we kind of targeted for earlier, and has that changed, and start making those adjustments, and we could do it at the next meeting.
Would that be a package we discussed in the budget process, or would it be a basic request as other organizations do?
Yeah, you could put it into the next budget, which would be after July 1st, but it's also present currently, and some of the funds are being spent in the current budget year as well. So you could put it into the current budget year.
Would it be accurate to say that money could be, I mean, it looks like you're a couple $100,000 off from the first phase of the project.
Listen, the most important thing the city can do is, when I came before you a little over a year ago with the other members of the stakeholder group, it was with the idea that we would inform, not realizing the money needs would be far greater than we ever envisioned. We actually had too much money, Butch. We were trying to figure out what are we going to do with the extra. That was prior to. Now, the opposite. And so anything the city could contribute to support the stakeholders in their efforts to provide this service for the community is going to be welcome. We put a number up there only as a placeholder, really. If you'd like to support even more, that's even better. So I'll leave it at that.
Councilor Irvin.
Is there, I do see, for all the reasons we discussed the first time, the potential and real benefit for the community. This is obviously a hard time, as we all know, to ask for money, especially when there are core services that we need to provide, and there's critiques on how we're providing those.
Right.
And is there a way to be creative about the support? I understand this is ultimately a not-for-profit. I'm assuming if it's
Lane County is like the city. It's nonprofit in terms of if someone donates, it becomes a 501c3 charitable donation. But I would just say, tell me a little bit more, Greg, what you're thinking.
What if we make it an investment to get it? What I'm hearing is this thing isn't going to happen unless it gets more funding. If I'm misunderstanding that, then that's a different conversation. But when asking the taxpayers of the city of Cottage Grove to fund additionally, it seems like we're in a negotiation, which is, let's get this thing going. There's a mutual benefit. But if it's going to be something that generates revenue, which health facilities do, then why don't we get paid back for it? Maybe an investment. Why don't we get a return on the investment beyond the community benefit, or just leaving it to community benefit? If it's a situation where this thing won't go through unless there's some upfront funding, then okay, let's talk about funding, but let's not just make it a gift.
Councilor Fleck.
Well, boy, if I hadn't been on the fire board budget committee for many, many years, I guess that would sound great. Unfortunately, I know that Medicare and Medicaid reimbursement rates continue to drop all the time. And so I can't imagine this is going to be a profitable venture. I mean, obviously that's a conversation to have with folks, but I would not seek reimbursement. I think I would just look at this as an investment into the healthcare needs of our community. And I certainly am supportive, to the tune you're asking for, certainly. But obviously with cost rising, I guess I'd want to see the totals on what we're looking for with these investments, but I am definitely supportive.
Thank you. Councilor Soulsby.
Thank you, Mayor Gowing. I'm with Greg Irvin. Actually, I'm struggling with just the timing and how everyone's struggling, and we're struggling as a city right now. And so also I do have some concerns, and I hate to bring them up because it's not a popular subject, but working and living downtown, I have seen some effects of South Lane Mental Health being downtown. And so I struggle with it moving next to, or some of their services moving next to our high school. And so that is a little bit of a stressor for me that I would want to explore a little bit more, because we have children there. And I see where I am, I see what goes in and out every day. And I don't mean that in a bad way, but to be an influence on our children, I do have concerns. So I'd want to explore that a little further as well.
Councilor Savage.
Thank you so much, Mr. Mayor. I have a different perspective. I think it's all good that we're here at the table talking about it. 20 years ago, I put myself through school, and I got myself into the medical field, and I was able to find a job wherever I went to because I had licensing, which allowed me to work in a capacity that not only made me feel good as a provider, but it filled up my paychecks, it filled up my bank. And to me, I saw this when I read this, when I was hearing about this being presented tonight, I thought about this as being an investment in our future for our kids. Our kids are going to be able to have education right here. We've also got Lane Community College, and now we have this opportunity to help earn professional licensures which don't require a degree. And that is thrilling to be able to go to school for 2 months, 6 months, 8 months and have a licensure and be able to work a lifetime working above minimum wage. So I had a different perspective, and my experience taught me that, gosh, this is amazing. I wish everybody had the opportunity that I did. So I've been in support of wanting to see what we can do to help. Thank you.
Councilor Roberts.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I want to echo Councilor Soulsby on that. There's parts of this idea I like, and parts of it I'm a little worried about. The South Lane mental health part next to our school, I do see that as possibly being problematic. I also see we are in a tough economic. I think things are going to get real tougher here in the next 6 to 8 months. That's my forecast. We just sat in this room and had a work session. How are we going to pay for roads? And so there's a lot of stuff that we need to look. But there's parts of this project that I do agree. It's a tough one. I still think we need to sit down and discuss some of it for this council for me to move forward with funds. That's what I have, Mr. Mayor. Thank you very much.
Anyone else? Councilor Stent.
I think I see this as a way to invest in preventative care and health maintenance that keeps our costs down in our emergency room. I think it's really sad that oral health is such an issue that people have to go to the emergency room. I think that's inefficient and very costly. I think that's part of the return on the investment we're talking about. I mean, if you don't have your health, you don't have anything. So I'm in support. Long story short.
Yes.
Councilor.
Just clarifying, does a lack of support from us jeopardize this project going forward? Financial support.
Well,
legitimately jeopardize it where this is a non-go.
I would say you're talking about financial support, not community support. Well, typically, I would say yes, to the extent that every one of those funders has said, who else is in? And if they don't see the local community in some way participating financially, this is when we ran into that big gap. Remember I told in the beginning, we had too much money. Not many people come in front of a group and say that, but we did. We had pledges for more than we needed. And then I explained what happened. And so I'll just say to you, it has to do with how people will interpret that. And I can't control that. I can say who contributed, but I can't control their results. Speak for themselves, I guess. Yeah.
Councilor Roberts.
I mean, I don't know if I'm wrong here, but I thought in the beginning that the idea of this could be like a dental clinic, and it seems to me that it's grown to be a little bit more.
There was no connection.
Okay.
The dental clinic came about because of the Rotary Club and Ford family and the school district. All of those parties were totally involved in that. This wasn't even out on the open yet at that point. I think what happened is that more and more that people realized how many people are not getting services right now, and they see them.
Well,
yeah.
Oh, I agree with that. I just have concerns on certain things. If South Lane Mental Health was in there, I live downtown. I can't say, but I just, the one that's over here, would there be a needle exchange, say, in this particular facilities run by them right next to the high school?
Okay, that's a fair question based on your concern, Michael. So what I'd like to do, I'd like to ask Eve to join me again. I get to know.
Because we have one right down the street.
Hey, so that's a great question to ask because the public's going to know stuff. So you're going to be managing the program going forward. How do you respond?
Sure. So we don't currently have needle exchanges in our primary care clinics. Most of the behavioral health services that would occur within the federally qualified health center would be what we call integrated behavioral health. So someone comes in for primary care services. The primary care physician has 15 minutes with that person and recognizes that there's a suite of other services this individual needs. And that may also include behavioral health services, may include poverty services or homelessness. We don't turn anyone away from an FQHC due to inability to pay. We will serve everyone who comes. So if behavioral health is a portion of what that individual needs for their holistic care, and we know that behavioral health outcomes, mental health outcomes are associated with physical health outcomes. You can't treat one without the other. So we integrate those models, and we have someone who can come in and provide some short-term therapy services for the individuals while we're getting them connected to longer-term therapy. So that is generally what we would be aiming for, the model we would be aiming for within the FQHC.
So then would there be a contract to that? I mean, could that change 2-3 years down the road that all of a sudden we find that there's different stuff going on out of that building that is not being in today's presentation? I mean, will there be a contract to that?
I don't know that we have a contract around the services that we provide. We provide primary care services throughout, right now, using Springfield area, and that's not what you're talking about in terms of a needle exchange is not within any of our FQHC facilities and isn't a common primary care program. There are other programs where we engage in that sort of measure to reduce harm. But usually not a part of a primary care visit.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councilor Fleck.
So in your other clinics, do you have a lot of issues around the facility typically?
No.
So, I'm sorry.
I would say that in the circumstances where we have encountered folks who, for example, are interested in camping in walkways, we place deterrent gates and fences and things in the off hours to make sure that the area around our facility is clean and well cared for and safe for staff as well as patients to feel comfortable coming into the facility.
Yeah, I have to say, in my experience, I'm caught a little off guard, to be honest, because this has not been my experience of your facilities. And I do think that healthcare, oh my gosh, I mean, you look nationwide, 50% of our bankruptcies nationwide are around healthcare costs. You know, that one-time emergency that just wipes out your bank account. We need a lot more of affordable healthcare, and I think this is huge for our community. And, you know, I certainly don't want to downplay concerns, but I do think the benefits of providing these services in our community are huge. Look at the price of gas today. And for folks to be able to go from here or from Drain up to Eugene to seek medical care, that's just a huge burden, you know, on anybody, to be honest, not to mention the low income folks in our community. So I guess I just really hope that we're going to have a long, thoughtful conversation about this, because I really think that the benefit really to this is huge. And I really want folks to be comfortable with that, because I just had said that I'm supportive, but I guess I'm also happy to advocate more if I need to, because of the value I see in this program. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Anyone else? Councilor Irvin?
So I agree. Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and I agree, Mr. Fleck. I think we should have as long of a discussion as we need to all be in a good spot with it. So I'll just say where I'm coming from right now, this second, and that as I see it, I recognize the value of a community support and having skin in the game, financial support. I want to balance that with being as fiscally conservative on behalf of the citizens as possible. And so there's some number that checks the box that doesn't off-put other donors when they go, oh, you know, there's some range of response that there's going to be there. What I don't know is how much that weighs into the decisions of other donors, what benefits other donors, what stake they have in the game or anything. So that's a really hard number to arrive at, to be as responsible with the city's money as possible. 100,000 seems like a lot. For me, it seems like more than is necessary to accomplish the mission. But I frankly, I don't know what that number is. I would probably say 10% of that would probably satisfy all the requirements, showing financial support, getting more money. I get the sense that the project may be delayed, but it won't stop if we don't financially support. So for me, having that assumption, I really just want to check the box of showing support for other donors to also show support. So that's kind of where I'm at with this conversation.
Councilor Fleck?
Mr. Myers, how much money are we getting in stimulus funds?
The total amount, I'm trying to think off the top of my head, but I think
like
it's
2.2 million. 2.4 million. So we're getting a whole lot of one-time cash that we have not seen in the city in the almost 20 years I've been sitting here. And I think that, you know, what is that, I'm trying to think, my brain's tired here, 2.5% of that.
It's $10 per citizen.
Yeah, I think that the investment is well worthwhile. I actually expected a whole lot more of an ask. So I kind of looked at this as a bargain, as a way of supporting this application. I mean, I'm certainly not going to fall on a sword, and I'm happy to negotiate with you too, Councilor Irvin. But I do support it, and I think that this is a very reasonable request of the city.
Anyone else? So this is a non-action item for tonight, so we'll bring it back if we want to go forward.
Very good. Thank you very much. I appreciate the way you treated each other with respect. Appreciate that.
Thank you. Okay, item B is approval of letter of commitment from Banner Bank Financing. Mr. Myers?
I think we're going to let Bert take care of this.
Ms. Likens?
Good evening again, and thank you. So we had a little change of course in putting this financing together. We originally thought that it would be appropriate and allowed for our legal counsel, local government law group, to prepare the agreement and bring it forward and designate it as a, what do I want to call it here, a tax-exempt bank qualified loan. And in the past, we have used our legal counsel to do that. So late Thursday or Friday, it came to light that Banner Bank was needing this to be prepared by bond counsel. And so the background stays the same. The need for the loan is to repair the community center roof. And we're asking for about a $930,000 loan. The proposal itself stays the same. So it will be a fixed rate tax exempt bank qualified interest rate of 2.77%. The city will be making quarterly payments, and we're paying for the bank legal fees and origination fees. The city is also responsible for our own legal counsel and now bond counsel as well. We will probably utilize a drawdown period of 6 months or shorter during the construction stage. And this evening, we are only asking that you authorize the city manager to sign the commitment letter that the bank provided us late this afternoon to proceed with this funding. They have extended the time frame to May 4th, which should be ample time for us to get this to the bond council and back to the bank and approved and going forward with the actual loan. So we would come back to you at a later time with a resolution and the financing agreement, which we had on this evening's agenda. Are there any questions?
Councilor Urban?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. It's related, but not directly. Did we see the contract for the proposal for this? I can't remember if the contingency.
The agreement was included with the resolution, but that was the agreement that was drawn up by the local law group, Carrie Conley. So that agreement will be very, very similar, if not the same, but it's going to have Hawkins Delafield would be the firm that we would use out of Portland to actually draft the agreement and submit it to the bank.
It's just related to the overall scope of the costs. 700 something is in my mind.
Yeah, I think it's actually the cost from the contractor is what,
781, 328. And then we included asbestos abatement of approximately $25,000, as well as a contingency amount, and I rounded it to get to the 930,000 even.
Okay. If we don't use the contingency, is that in the contract that we get that back, whether we don't pay it, or how does the contingency work?
It would be part of the financing that we would be making our loan payments on. I don't believe that you change a loan amount down the road. So with the cost of materials and the length of time that this project is going to take, I would anticipate that our contingency is going to be very, very close.
Ms. Conley?
That I was just going to answer on because the direct changes in the construction contract, which is what we're just said. Yeah. Just, you don't have to. It's going to be like that you will.
I'm sorry, but I can't hear what Carrie's saying.
Oh, I'm sorry, Bert. I was just actually saying that you answered the question.
I've never heard of a loan that is flexible to how much you spend.
Councilor Fleck.
Well, and I guess that I would offer that in reading this, we can't pay it off before year 2, but after that we can pay it. So if we didn't spend that contingency, we would just then apply that to the principal.
Correct.
So with that, I'll go ahead and move that the city council authorize the city manager to sign the commitment letter with Banner Bank.
Second.
I have a motion with a second. Is there any discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay.
Thank
Item
you.
C is homeless discussion. Mr. Myers.
So what I'd like to do is I'll share my screen and step you through the PowerPoint presentation and some of the information that we're going to try to present at the town hall on April 5th. And so this is an opportunity for the council to kind of get a dry run of the presentation, to see if there's any information that's missing, anything you want to add, what additional stuff that we need in there for the town hall, and to give you an opportunity to see it before it happens, so that you can be better prepared for the discussion as well at the town hall. So the intent tonight, I don't think, is to take any comments from anyone else, but just to have you do the discussion, and this is for your benefit as you prepare for that town hall meeting. We can't do this in private. It's a public body, so we have to do this. But so we're kind of giving you the opportunity to make that part and to do that discussion. So homelessness is a lack of regular access to safe, adequate, and stable housing. That's one definition, and this is the one from Portland State University. There's a variety of other definitions that we could look at that would possibly be used. I mean, the youth homelessness has a different definition and is a little broader for youth and for those functions and activities. Others are a little tighter based on individuals or families. I gave you in the last packet, in the packet for tonight's meeting, this document that we found as well. It's Homelessness in Oregon, a review of trends, causes, and policy options. And as we gave you, I think over the course of the 3 meetings, this is the 3rd meeting now, meeting with the council, we've given you a pretty good stack of documents and studies and reports to read and think about as we consider homelessness. I think this report by Eco Northwest really brings it home to us and to some other information that we have in Cottage Grove, and specifically being our housing needs analysis. And so as you look at this report, and one of the findings in the report is that homelessness has declined since the Great Recession. That's 2008, not back in 1931, but not as much as it would have in a better functioning housing market. Oregon's high rents make the crisis more severe than those in most states, and left unabated, it will contribute to a growing homeless population going forward. Some of the things that you may see, 2 weeks ago now, I think it was 2 weeks ago now on Tuesday, the eviction protections went away. So more than likely we're going to see additional homeless as a result of that. Just the economy as a whole, and inflation and shrinkflation and all the other stuff that's going on is going to have that impact on homelessness as well, because that will translate into, can they afford those higher rents, and putting a bigger portion of their household income into paying for housing. Like its West Coast neighbors, Oregon has not expanded its emergency shelter capacity to match the size of its homeless population. And in 2018, it had the 2nd highest rate of unsheltered homeless people in the country. The state had also the 3rd highest rate of chronically homeless people in the US. Pretty substantial numbers. One myth: homelessness is difficult to predict. That's the fact is that economists John Quigley and Stephen Raphael have shown that housing affordability can predict the severity of homelessness. One formula shows, and this is pretty amazing that they're able to show this, and we'll show you a graph a little bit too, shows a 10% increase in rent leads to a 6.5 increase in the rate of homelessness. That they were able to tie that in directly. The West Coast, Oregon, California, and Washington face higher rates of homelessness due to their lax laws on providing shelters. That's the myth. The fact is the West Coast faces one of the largest affordable housing shortages in the country, which has been identified as the #1 cause of homelessness. This graph shows the median rents, that high median rates have an impact on the rates of homelessness. And you'll notice the states that have the highest homeless count, if you are also the ones who have the highest median statewide rent. Hawaii is the worst in the country. Their median gross rent is somewhere around $1,500. And that puts their statewide homeless count at about 50 to every 10,000 people. New York, California, Washington, Nevada, and Oregon are in that top group as well. So it's tied to that. We look at places like Tennessee, Kentucky, and West Virginia, where some of the methamphetamine problem or fentanyl problem is rampant and just terribly going out of control, or even opioid use. That's not impacting homelessness. It's the rents that are doing it. And that's what their study found. This is from Zillow, and this is kind of interesting. You think of Zillow as just doing pictures of houses that are for sale, or opportunities to find housing. But they did a research project, and they looked at what happens when rent increases. If rent is at 22% of your household income, your share of income spent on rent, when it hits 22%, the trend line starts to go up. Before that, it's kind of hanging around there in that between 0.1 and 0.2%. But then all of a sudden, when it hits 22, that it starts increasing. The next point that it increases is at 32%. So as your housing cost takes up 32% of your income, the trend line changes, and it goes at a much steeper rate, all the way up and kind of staying consistent up until you're hitting the 50% range of your household income. So the biggest piece that ties to that is how much are we spending on our household income on rent or housing costs, and it has a significant impact on homelessness. Oregon's population is 1/3 of the U.S. population, so we represent about 1.3% of the U.S. population. Oregon's population of those experiencing homelessness is 2.6% of the total U.S. population experiencing homelessness. We have twice the amount of homelessness based on the U.S. numbers in Oregon as the country does. Chronic homelessness represents 4.5% of the total U.S. population of chronically homelessness. That should be the 1.3 if we were truly reflecting that consistent number across the board. Our housing needs analysis demonstrated that we have a housing shortage in Cottage Grove, a shortage of about 1,379 housing units that need to be constructed between now and 2018 when the study was done, and 2038. That is an average of 69 new units a year. And this chart shows what share those units would need to be. 20% of those units need to be extremely low income. That is less than 30%. The income needs to be less than 30% of MFI, the median family income. 26% of those units that need to be constructed are between 30 and 60% of the MFI. And then the low income is about 13% or 178, and the extremely low is 280 and 354. We have it all across the board, though. And you look at the middle income, we're short 299, the high income 268, or 19 and 22%. So on those two ends of the spectrum, we're almost even, but the lower end is just a little bit ahead. There's a bigger shortage on the lower end. Our new rentals that are being constructed are probably going to be either in that low, maybe in the low, some of them, but most of them are going to be in the middle income portion there of those 299 units. Just to kind of give you an idea of what those median family incomes are. This is from the housing needs analysis in 2018. So these numbers reflect the 2018 income levels. If the household earns $19,000, that's at 30% of the MFI in 2018. That means they can afford $480 of rent. I don't know if anybody's looked, but can you find an apartment for $480 in Cottage Grove? There's a list for the tiny homes, and that's probably about the place where you'd be able to get. So, and then it goes up from there: $32,000 for the 50%, $51,000 for the MFI of 80%. And so these numbers would actually be different. The rent portion would probably be higher, it would be lower because of the changes in the MFI and over the course of the year as a result of inflation and stuff. There's a myth. There are plenty of shelter beds available in Eugene for the homeless in Lane County. The fact is there are enough shelter beds to serve fewer than half of those experiencing unsheltered homelessness in Lane County. The total homeless in Lane County, according to the Homeless by Name list. The Homeless by Name list is a new tool that has started being used in the last year or so that is actually taking the entry forms for the data entry for people to get to points where they go to food banks, they go to mental health facilities, they go to the federally qualified health clinics, they go to the hospital, they go to Southland Wheels or Southland Mental Health, those services that are provided around the communities. And when they do that, they have an intake form. The intake form takes their information, their name, age, and are they housed? And this is the number that they're starting to use now. And this is the January 22 number, that there are 4,003 homeless individuals or people experiencing homelessness in Lane County. There are 1,934 shelter beds, and that includes ours in the warming shelter. This is a chart showing the homeless by name list numbers for Lane County. Eugene's homeless by name list for January of 22 is 3,136. Springfield is 401. Cottage Grove is 188. And so there's 188 people that have filled out their entry or responded to the intake forms that they are homeless in Cottage Grove. And these are people that are in Cottage Grove and getting services in Cottage Grove. So these homeless by name lists are able to track where these individuals are. They can't give an address because they don't have one, but they do access those services in those communities. And you can see how it breaks down. Florence, 133, Oak Ridge, 37, 13 in Junction City, Crestwell, 23. And then you get into the 2s and 1s and in Notai, and who knows where the unknowns, because some people don't answer all the questions in the intake and get their services. Local indicators of homelessness these are some really interesting numbers, and these are brand new numbers. We've got through February in these numbers. Let's look at the shower program first. The shower program, we started this back in July of 21 when we purchased the shower trailer and set it up at community sharing. They've been running it for since July in 2021. And you can see that more and more people are starting to use the shower trailer. We're bringing more people there. There was a significant increase, you'll notice, in January. I think we can tie that to the fact that we made those changes at the community center and putting the homeless that are there at the community center under the canopy, and in creating their cubicles with the fences that they were then able to leave. They could close their gate, lock it, and leave their property and their belongings. Before, most of them didn't want to do that because if they did, somebody would go through their stuff and take it or destroy it or mess it up. And so we actually had a number of them actually start using the homeless shelter, the warming shelters as well in January as a result of being able to lock up their belongings at their site and go to those other places and take those other services. So each of those months you'll see in January we had 53 people over the course of every Wednesday using the shower program. 36 of those were unique individuals, were not recounted. So some of them came a couple of weeks during the month or every week during the month. And so 36 people are unique. The light bars are the unique individuals, and the darker bars are the total numbers of showers that were given at the shelter, at the warm shower service. And that's from 11 to 3 every Wednesday. So pretty significant use there. We've seen a number of those individuals in the community, and especially at the community center, where they started using the shower facility. They can pick up new clothes and clean clothes, and it's made a huge difference where they've been able to go out and maybe even look for jobs. And we've had a couple of them actually get jobs as a result of getting cleaned up, and one of them getting additional counseling and stuff as well, where they can go out and do that. They've got the shower opportunity. So that's been successful. You have this season's warming shelter on the left side of the chart. Started in December. The season actually started in November, but I don't think we really had any activations in November. December, we had 10 activations. So the first bar is the activation number. We had 134 people come to the warming shelter. That's the number of total guests over the course of those 10 activations. 37 of those were unduplicated. So we had 37 individuals throughout the month of December in those 10 activations that were different people. And the average attendance per night was 13. In January, we had 8 activations and 111 guests that came with 40 unique individuals. And our average went up to 14. In February, we had 7 activations and 121 guests. 43 unique individuals. 17 is our average. Averages mean that you've got some numbers above that. We have 17 warming shelters. And so on several nights, we had, I think there were 2 nights that you had 3 couples in shelters. There were 3 nights that were, we actually turned people away at the warming shelters because we were at capacity. One night, there was a young couple that had checked in, or they were just about to go into their cabin, when an older couple arrived, and the younger couple said, "Here, we're leaving, you take ours," because they were full. And the older couple would have been out on the street that night. And you remember in February, we had some pretty vicious cold nights. So those are interesting numbers. We had a total number of guests over the 3 months of activation of 366. The average for that whole 3 months is 14.6. And during those 3 months, the unduplicated number is 70. So over the course of those 3 months, and this is the total unduplicated, so it's not totaling up the unduplicated in the 3 months. These are the number of homeless that came to the shelters that weren't counted multiple times in any of the other months. During that course of time, during those 366, we had 2 guests from Eugene. So not a lot of people came down from Eugene. Egan Warming Shelter hasn't opened yet. They didn't open in any of these. So there were services that were needed, but we were serving people that were from Cottage Grove. And now I'm going to turn it over to our attorney to handle the legal pieces and the court case stuff.
So one might think that the recent court cases and the legislation that has passed compounds this problem, but instead, as Richard has pointed out, the result of the increasing homelessness in our community around the state and all through the entire western states is more a result of the increasing costs of housing as opposed to limits on enforcement tools. So the way that I look at this, and we heard in public comment today, everybody is becoming aware of there are certain requirements of local jurisdictions. So I'm going to break those down for you. It kind of breaks into 3 tiers, 2 cases, 1 piece of state legislation. I have talked with you about it before, but we're going to cover it again for members of the public as well as the council. And so what it comes down for me is that the historic prohibitions on occupying public spaces is not constitutional when it's applied to folks who have nowhere to go. So to the extent that we've prohibited camping and sleeping on park benches in the past, that's because the assumption has always been there is somewhere they can go. They have sufficient funds to pay for alternative housing. And we are coming to a point, and the case law has now identified that if they don't have money to pay for alternative housing, and if there is no free alternative housing, we can't enforce those laws against them. It's against the 8th Amendment. And that is what the Ninth Circuit told us in Martin v. Boise back in 2019. I think that sort of summarizes that statement there. So Martin v. Boise had a really interesting footnote. I always like pointing it out because even the justices who were deciding this case and telling the city of Boise, you can't enforce your camping and you can't enforce your sleeping in public prohibitions, they wanted to say it's a very narrow holding. They said in this footnote, it doesn't cover individuals who do have access to adequate temporary shelter, whether they have the means to pay or because it's realistically available to them for free, but they're choosing not to use it. The problem that imposed on our police department, the Chief Shepherd, was how does a citing officer know whether they have alternatives? And so on a case-by-case basis, early when this decision was decided, they were going through a litany of tests to decide, does this person have an alternative location? Do they have money to pay? Did they just choose not to go home tonight? Did their wife come out? Are they runaways from home? Who knows? If there was an alternative, they actually were able to cite. But the easier, better solution is to provide alternative shelter. If you know there's alternative shelter, that's, and what's the word? Practically available is the term used in the case. Then those ordinances still can be enforced. You can still cite individuals who are sleeping in your parks. And then this footnote goes on to carve out even another area of exception. So even where shelter is unavailable, an ordinance prohibiting sitting, lying, or sleeping outside at particular times or particular locations might well be constitutionally permissible. That is our classic time, place, and manner ordinance, and you're going to hear that language when we talk about HB 3115. So too might an ordinance barring the obstruction of public rights-of-ways or the erection of certain structures. So even if you're allowed to sleep on a park bench, are you allowed to build a house in the middle of the city park? Maybe not. The justices were opening that door to say there might be a way to craft ordinances so that you're complying with the 8th Amendment, but you're still protecting your public spaces. So at that point, we were all wondering, do we play the game of trying to draft around these? Do we try to fill in these exceptions? And as we will see, you can move forward, Richard. Those little loopholes continue to get tightened by case law and then the Oregon legislature. So Blake v. City of Grants Pass, you might be familiar with that title, if not the case itself. It was decided in 2020 by the local district court, so the Medford District Court. It is now on appeal to the Ninth Circuit. It will be interesting to see what the Ninth Circuit says. But they applied Martin. Grants Pass was doing exactly what I was saying, trying to draft around Martin, enforce around Martin, trying to show that there are alternatives, claiming that they weren't criminally sanctioning people. They were civil penalties that were being applied. They were, instead of penalizing somebody for sleeping there, they were penalizing them for having blankets, essentially, pillows and blankets. So it wasn't the people they were targeting, it was their stuff. And in this case, this federal district court judge decided or clarified, I guess, that the Eighth Amendment prohibits a city from punishing homeless people for taking minimal measures to keep themselves warm and dry while sleeping. So you don't have to just let them sleep out there in the rain. You have to let them have the materials that are going to be protecting them from the elements. The next major point is when there are no alternative forms of shelter available. So even in Martin v. Boise, there was discussion about alternatives. There was a shelter that one of the individuals didn't want to sleep in because it required him to take religious service before he was allowed to eat, and they found that that's not a practical alternative. So Blake, the City of Grants Pass, expanded on that, including a church-affiliated entity is not an alternative shelter if it has strict rules and requires mandatory attendance to church and other church-affiliated activities. The City of Grants Pass was trying to point to a lot of lands outside city boundaries. Well, they don't have to be here, they can be there in rest areas, they can be outside on BLM land. And the court found, no, that's not a reasonable alternative because there are restrictions placed on those lands, making a homeless individual's use of them infeasible. And then warming shelters, they were saying, well, there are warming shelters as an alternative. And those also were deemed not reasonable alternatives because they might not have beds, they weren't available consistently, they didn't open every night, and they didn't have enough capacity to house the full homeless population in Grants Pass area. And finally then, we were saying, we really were wondering, is it only criminal sanctions that are subject to Martin v. Boise? I made that argument myself. And my partner said, Carrie, that's probably not within the intent of that language. And sure enough, like the City of Grants Pass says, it's any penalty. It's a civil penalty, it's a criminal penalty. And so that tied local jurisdictions' hands further. It clarified the meaning of Martin v. Boise, and again, just really funneled local jurisdictions towards, hey guys, what we have to focus on is providing alternative housing. You can't just point to what's there currently. You can't enforce the rules on the books. You have to create this alternative housing, whether it's leaving your parks open and not enforcing these, or actually providing some other level of transitional housing. So then the Oregon legislature took this last session in HB 3115, another number you're familiar with hearing. And I think the point here was, first of all, to codify to explain the case law to date, as well as to codify it so that in case the Ninth Circuit law goes away, in case the Supreme Court, the United States Supreme Court took this and that case law went away, Oregon is still bound. And the goal here is to change laws so that we're not regulating the acts of sitting, lying, sleeping, or keeping warm and dry outdoors. And those types of laws have to be objectively reasonable as to time, place, and manner with regards to persons experiencing homelessness. So initially you read that and you think, okay, well, if it's objectively reasonable time, place, and manner, we can still enforce these, even against persons experiencing homelessness. But the risk is pretty great because it's an affirmative defense to any kind of charge of violating such a city or county law. And the court so that the law is not objectively reasonable. So the court is going to look at the totality of circumstances to decide, is this community enforcing this against this homeless person, and is this objectively reasonable, looking at all of the various options this individual has. So are we enforcing our parking regulations such that they are not allowed to sleep in their cars? Are we closing every single park every single night and cleaning away all of the obstructions to our right-of-ways and closing our public parking lots? If you're doing all of those things, which until this body of law was enforceable and normal practice, that is not objectively reasonable. It will be another violation of 3115, let alone a violation of the federal 8th Amendment. So the other risk there, so we kind of want to be modifying our enforcement and ensuring that the totality of our enforcement is objectively reasonable as to homeless individuals. But if you leave a law on your books that potentially isn't objectively reasonable, plaintiffs experiencing homelessness may bring suit for injunctive or declaratory relief against your city. They will have to provide you with a 90-day notice, but to the extent those laws are on the books, you are risking not only suit, but payment of attorney's fees. So we are having our enforcement options narrowed significantly. We're also having the types of laws on our books needing to be tailored so that they are objectively reasonable as to the entire population. And we can't just look at one strand of our civil enforcement or our criminal penalties. We have to look at everything altogether. So your entire code book is sort of, we're examining that now. It needs, we need to audit it. And we have, actually. We'll be talking about that in a minute. So actually, I kind of talked about this, these two prongs, what we now have to do against under 3115. See sanctions for camping, sleeping on public property. That's the case law, Martin v. Boise, Lake v. Grants Pass. We also have to amend existing city ordinances to remove language regulating sitting, lying, sleeping, or keeping warm and dry outdoors on public property open to the public.
And it's important to note that that's the minimum. I mean, if we don't do anything else, that's the thing we have to do.
Right. All right, so next slide. Oh, you're already there. Great. All right, so turning to your code, which Richard actually, he and I together looked at your code, but really he pulled these provisions out to say, I think, are these a problem? And yeah, I verified, oh yes. So if you're going to do just the strict compliance with 3115, you would drop Municipal Code 12.24.020 regarding sleeping, camping out or sleeping in a park area when it's closed. So you drop I, and then you drop K, which is making it unlawful for a person to enter or remain in a park or a park between the hours of 10 and 5 a.m. Those were sort of redundant anyway, but you know. So the objectively reasonable totality of circumstances amendment would be that deletion.
The nice piece is J here. J does create and set up, it does talk about having the authority to regulate some of these. And this can get us into some of those designations that may meet that time, place, and manner. But that's not what we're considering the minimum right now. That would be something beyond minimum.
Right, and the other problem with that, with just relying on J, in my opinion, is that that has unfettered discretion, and that's solely in the city manager's authority. And you wouldn't want your city manager to be drawing arguments that he's making decisions that are discriminatory, he or she, that are violating civil rights because he isn't aware of all the totality of circumstances with regards to a person who's experiencing homelessness. So I think that's good to have that there, but you wouldn't want that to be the only regulation. So the minimum action, as we just went through, would result in camping, sleeping, lying, and keeping warm and dry being allowed on all outdoor public property within the city limits of Cottage Grove, including parks, right-of-ways, sidewalks, planting strips. And that, of course, ignores that prong of Martin v. Boise that says that you can regulate to limit obstructions of public rights of way, but this would be like the bare bones. We don't want to have any students coming with us, and we are not going to provide any alternative shelter. So the next slide, okay? So objectively reasonable time, place, and manner regulations, which again, going back to Martin, said it's time, place, and manner is okay, maybe, depending on everything else that they're experiencing. So time, place, and manner regulations with regards to persons experiencing homelessness, prohibitions on blocking sidewalks and rights of way. Yeah, let's try to keep tents out of your sidewalks. That seems like a danger to everyone, including those persons experiencing homelessness. Prohibiting safety risks, including regulating fire and flames. I forgot to mention in HB 3115 that targets regulations except those regulating fire and flame because of the safety concern. Overnight limits in some but not all city parks. That goes to exactly the public comment that we heard from Mr. Taddy, with which he commented, let's just have some public space open, close everything else. That is what some cities are doing. Enforcing reasonable parking limits with notice. So we're not going to prohibit all public parking overnight on every single right-of-way in every single parking lot. We're going to allow people to sleep there potentially. And we let them maybe stay there, and then we provide notice to say it's time to move. Alternative shelter sites improve the totality of the circumstances as applied to persons experiencing homelessness. So the critical element there is you get to do all 1, 2, 3, 4, the 4 top bullet points, and you can do those with more certainty that you won't be sued to the extent there's alternative shelter available. So if you're digging into those homeless numbers, you're I guess, increasing their options. Then you can enforce and protect other public spaces with a little more certainty, a lower likelihood of liability. So possibly objectively reasonable amendments. We talked about the bare minimum, right? If you're just going to strike things from your code. So here's a little more crafting to give public spaces some protection, certain public spaces some protections, while leaving others open. So J remains, as we talked about, I would come out, but K remains with a little bit of tailoring to say it shall be unlawful for any person to enter or remain in community, neighborhood, and mini parks, and any riparian or wetland areas from 10 to 5 a.m., except as provided below. And the rest of that reflects your current code language. So all we did was add that little yellow italicized piece. And the reason for that, of course, is because that what we're hoping is a reasonable time, place, and manner, especially in conjunction with alternative locations that persons experiencing homeless can go to.
And there could be other modifications. You could actually add to this that outside of that 10 to 5, during the 5 a.m. to 10 p.m., you could say you can't have camping going on within 500 feet of a playground or within 200 feet of a playground or a sport court or those kind of things. You can add something that in as well so that you're protecting an area during the daytime. So some of those might be reasonably, if you said within 1,000 feet, you might get a little bit more unreasonable there. But those are possible alternatives as well.
Right, and again, totality of the circumstances is what is going to be the bottom line litmus test. So if 1,000-foot buffer wipes out everything in the city, well, somebody's going to figure that out, and they're going to say they're effectively prohibiting all use of parks overnight. All right, so an addition, possibly objectively reasonable amendment would be to add, harkening back to that prohibitions on obstructions in the public right-of-way, adding this section of camping in right-of-way, so prohibiting camping in the right-of-way. And this currently is a section, so 1030 is a section of your code. It only has section 010 right now. It also governs blocking roadways by making unlawful transfers from vehicles to pedestrians. And so this would be a natural location to then, go beyond that. You can't just stop your car in the right of way. You also can't camp in the right of way. And we are proposing language, but again, as Richard points out, all to be tailored, all for your consideration, just an idea. A person may camp in a vehicle on city right of way if the vehicle is parked in conformance with all established parking regulations, the vehicle is not parked within 100 feet of a public or private school or public playground, the vehicle is not being repaired in the right of way, the vehicle is operational and can legally operate on the street, no material items, supplies, or waste are on the street, sidewalk, bike lane, or planting strip. And then B would be no camping in a tent, structure, shelter, or other non-vehicle is allowed in the right of way, including bike lanes, sidewalks, and planting strips. So one of the things that's coming to light as this body of law develops is to the extent that you are allowing people to sleep in their cars, they are not forced onto the ground in your parks. So a lot of jurisdictions are saying our citizens are upset. They have cars parking in locations where they didn't used to, and it's proliferating. We don't like them parking outside our house in our residential neighborhood. But the counter argument to that is, yes, but do you have a problem in your parks right now? And they say no. I'm like, well, then you're lucky, because many jurisdictions are experiencing problems in their rights of way and in their parks and on their sidewalks and elsewhere. So as long as you're enforcing your parking restrictions and people are parking within the legal limits, and then you're providing notice and they're moving on, that's really a fair way to treat them. That is potentially alternative shelter.
And I've gone around early in the morning, like 3 o'clock, 2 o'clock in the morning, and I've counted or found about 20 vehicles that are parking and sleeping on the streets or in public parking lots in our community. That's not every road, but that's some of the major ones that traverse through. And on another night, they go through and they'll be in different locations. So they understand right now our code is that, yeah, they can park on the roads. We don't have anything that says you can't sleep in your vehicle. You can't sleep in, we do have a code that says you can't lodge in a vehicle. It's not meant for lodging unless you have written permission of the owner. So most of them own their vehicle and they're going to say, yeah, I can sleep in my vehicle. So essentially we don't have anything that prohibits that. What we're using right now is the 72-hour rule that it applies to all vehicles on the right of way. That they're not allowed to be stored on the right of way more than 72 hours, and they have to move. Most of the rolling homeless are moving them every day or every 2 days. Moving around that.
Can I ask a question? Sure. So, and you're going to keep the 72 hours in your proposal?
And that's one of our regulations, yeah. The 72 hours is kind of important too. House Bill 4124 says that if you let something go beyond 72 hours, it becomes a campsite. And then all of a sudden you're dealing with regulations and requirements in removing and notice requirements for that campsite. So when we hit 72 hours, we're trying to go out and tag things. We've just tagged in the last couple of weeks a brands taking 50-foot toy hauler fifth wheel parked in front of the neighbor's house. The neighbor calls and complains about their other neighbor parking this on the street, and they're storing it on the street. So this rule applies to all vehicles, not just those that are being housed or used for housing. And I think that helps in our totality. That, hey, this is something that applies to everyone. We're not just thinking on homeless issues here. This is the right of way. It's not a storage yard. It's the right of way.
Right. It wasn't drafted in order to target persons experiencing homelessness. It's what has been on your books forever. It segues nicely with that 3124. I have to correct you just a little because we don't know what an established campground is. They don't have a definition for that. And it's just that you have to provide 72 hours notice to established campgrounds. We don't really know what that is, but we are assuming that if they're parked legally within that 72-hour allowance, they can't be an established campground. And therefore, if you enforce your current law that's on the books across the board uniformly, you shouldn't run afoul of 3124.
So another quick question, if you don't mind. When we're talking about, as you were going through earlier, the Martin versus Boise, it talked about just those items to stay warm and dry. Yet it sounds like the state went further than that to also include belongings. Does that sound correct?
In 4124, yeah.
So I think Grants Pass was the beginning of that, where they were saying you can't target somebody, you need to be able to let them be warm and dry, you need to be able to let them protect themselves against the element. Some people could argue that meant a tent. And then 3115 codified that.
Councilor Soulsby.
Thank you. So I think I may have asked this question last time, but I can't remember if I got an answer. I might have got distracted. But on I-5, I see signs that say no camping. How does the state get away with that?
This does apply to, so public buildings in 3115 applies to state, every state on down. My guess is that the state is going to argue we have alternatives. The hazard to the individuals experiencing homelessness and drivers who have to use the I-5 corridor, that safety concern overrides, or that would factor into the totality of circumstances, so that we get to protect drivers and pedestrians and campers from populating this area. And that we have other places.
And we know as in dealing with ODOT and some of the local people, they're having a really tough time getting approval to enforce that. In some places they just can't. And so the signs are up. They're going to have to start complying with 3115 as well, that some of those signs are probably going to disappear. They've actually been sued a number of times to have some pretty hefty lawsuits as a result of removing property and moving people off of some of the right-of-way width that's not road, but it's grass and trees and ditches.
Councilor Stannett.
Can we go back maybe to the reasoning behind possibly prohibiting overnights in the riparian and wetland areas?
Yeah. And maybe Richard can talk about that more, because.
And I threw those in for discussion purposes. The riparian and wetland areas are those sensitive lands that we have to protect, and we've got specific rules under DSL, the Division of State Lands, and the Army Corps and others that regulate how those pieces of property get used and developed. And so it was kind of, if we've got those other state and federal regulations on those pieces of property, that we're supposed to be protecting those pieces. And any kind of contamination or use of those could create problems. Number one, if they're in the riparian zone, especially in Cottage Grove, all of our riparian zones are impacted by rivers that are significantly changed based on what comes out of the reservoir. So at any given time, that water level can go up and down, and somebody could be in the riparian zone and float down the river. And, so there's some safety there as well as protecting those spaces. So we kind of threw those in as items to talk about and think about, what other sensitive pieces of property or lands that might need extra protection that we protect anyway, that would also be protected.
So our Riverside Park, would that be a community park? Would you be seeing that as a riparian area?
Yeah, and you could expand the riparian area to include greenway, because the riparian is just a portion of that greenway, because it only goes up so far, and planning, I think, is so far, it's up so far from the water level. But the greenway, there's other protections under state law under for land greenways, and so that may be wider than the riparian zone. So we may look at some greenway properties and say, yeah, I need a greenway. But I think most of the greenway are designated as your neighborhood. But that's, if they're not, then they're eligible for it.
Well, we got a fair number of people under the bridge now, I'd imagine.
Right. But see, we don't have this.
Right.
The other question, though, even though these may be reasonable and objectively reasonable as we put these together, and we have some parks, say, for example, two that stand out are North Regional and Arbor Nature Park. If those fill, or let's say we have a flood, and the Row River Nature Park is like in 1996, completely underwater, that's no longer available as an alternative shelter site. All these sites then may be open because there's no place for them to go. So we've got to be careful on looking at these, if we narrow that too much, or if something happens on one of those, that it is out of commission and they can't be there, then the other places, even if we so they're limited or restricted, may get reopened as a result of there is no longer alternative.
And that's another reason to continue adding to that list of alternatives, so that not only in that instance would you not be able to enforce this, but you wouldn't be able to have somebody come in and point to this and say this is not objectively reasonable. There's X number of days that everything floods here. There's this many homeless people in Cottage Grove. They have something on their books that is now not objectively reasonable because there's not sufficient alternatives.
Councilor Soulsby.
But none of this is really enforceable. Truly.
Well, I mean, I do not want you guys to be the test case. Do not want you to be the test case. And that is why I'm harping on, let's have a lot of alternatives.
But we can't be sued if we don't arrest, correct? Isn't that the way Martin versus Boise is framed?
That is correct now, and that changes July 1st, 2023.
What does that change?
So that's when HB 3115.
So even if we aren't enforcing those rules, it's still on the books. So we've got to get rid of the stuff off the books before July 1st. Or make it reasonably adjusted.
Right. And the hope is that then it would be enforceable, and you would have a 90-day notice if somebody thinks it isn't reasonable, and we would crash further.
So what does that 90-day notice mean? That we have to work with them now? I mean, I just feel like we're being, for lack of a better phrase, being held hostage here. I'm having a really hard time with this because I look at Eugene, and I believe Eugene and Portland are highest in the nation for homeless.
LA and Seattle, but then you go to Hawaii. Most of us have been to Hawaii. It's worse, so it may be worse, and we just don't know.
But I'm not arguing. Those places,
they're huge.
And they have a lot of shelters, and they have a lot of,
not for the number.
No, not for the number, but still, that could happen to us too. And we're very close to Eugene. So that's my fear.
I totally understand. And the standard concern that I'm hearing from my communities is if we build it, they will come. That's what it boils down to. And the only thing that I can say is, first, we don't have a lot of choice given the state of the law right now. The state and at least the Ninth Circuit are telling the Ninth Circuit cities and counties, start building homes, make homes more affordable. I mean, that's a message.
That's a project. I mean, no city can keep up. I mean, we're so
I know, and the influx is terrible.
And right now there's a good example of the legislature in Utah is wrestling with this because Salt Lake, and Midvale, the three cities in Utah that are really making a difference, and they're doing a lot of stuff for homeless. But all around Salt Lake, you've got Draper and Sandy, and I can't remember all of them. They're not doing anything. And those three cities are saying, hey, wait a minute, this is supposed to be, we need something in state law that's making this a regional approach. Because we're doing all the work, we're spending all the money, and these other communities aren't doing anything. And that's one of the challenges. And the state hasn't moved that way yet, where they're trying to work on a regional approach. We're trying to work on a regional approach. We're working closely with Lake County. They're partnering, they're providing, they're helping do some things. They bought all the pilot shelters in the 15 that are coming. They bought, and they're actually giving them to us. So they're trying to do things so that the rural communities can address their needs as well as trying to enhance and grow stuff in the larger metropolitan areas so that people don't move around. That's one of the reasons I pointed out what happened in the last 3 months to warming shelters. We only had 2 people come down from Eugene. And are the gas prices going to impact that and keep that way? I don't know. But it's, why did we not have as many? Several years ago, we had a bunch come down, but it didn't open and broke them down. So maybe it's a combination of COVID and the gas prices. Don't know. I mean, all those factors can come into play there. But yeah, it's one of those things we have to think about and try. the housing by name list is useful, because if when you do one of those shelters or you do some service, you're going to do it in here, and you'll have that information of where did they get their services. That's the only reason we knew those two were from Eugene, is because they got the name in the housing in the intake form, and bingo, it pops up. It's confidential information. You can't share it with anybody, but it is something that they do know and they're keeping track of. Are people moving? And out of 366 million, so, and that's not bad. So hopefully that's a good sign, but it's going to change. The studies that they've done around the country, Colorado and other places, they haven't seen it. They just say, no, it's not really happening. Because they've been watching it and trying to see if they can track it, see if it happens. But people move. Even people, house people move around for different reasons. So there's going to be some, but they haven't seen a significant number on other units. But I don't know if it's because they haven't seen huge improvements or differences or something there to make that change.
I was going to make the same 2 points you just made, but so the first is everyone is figuring this out right now, and to the extent that it can be regional solutions, as Richard pointed out, there isn't going to be like an influx to one area because they're relying on services. And then
you really don't think so? Really don't think so?
Not if it's a regional solution. So if everybody is incrementally increasing alternative options, alternative shelters, transitional housing, what would be the motivation to go to leave their community? And then the other is that the numbers, at least from the data and the studies, shows that the number of homelessness doesn't correlate to the number of services provided or the lack of services provided. It's literally related to the cost of housing. So if you bring that down.
Yeah, but that there's definitely a big community in the homeless community that have statistically been homeless a very long time. And so that's a different core group. And so I'm just worried about, a core group coming. And, it's just to a brand new area that doesn't really have it. And that's just my concern and my concern for our community.
Yeah, but I also think some of the information in the report from Eco Northwest and our own housing needs analysis indicates that the lack of affordable housing has been an issue for a long time as well. Yeah. And so these people that have lost their housing or lost that opportunity have been around because they're in the community. Hope, one of them that we've helped in the community center and everything, she was homeless in the community for 8 years after losing her home. So, I mean, it's, it's their hope. They don't want to leave.
And that's not what I'm talking about. But there is,
And you're talking about some of the chronic homes. And that's the more severe cases that some of those are people who should not be on the street and should be in a state hospital. And what's the immoral thing is the state having a state hospital and beds not being used. And we having people on our streets that the police have to pick up because they're a danger to others and themselves, or doing things that they shouldn't be doing, and then trying and having to really fight to get them into one of those facilities.
And our city has only 3 ambulances. So when they're going on medical calls like that.
And that's why police become the first responder for those mental health crises that occur from those kinds of situations. We have somebody downstairs, I think he's still downstairs, Scott's still back there, that we've held over from the previous week because the judge is trying to put together the stuff to see if they can get him into a facility because he should not be on the street. Right. And those are the ones that, we'll say this, they give the homeless a bad name because they're ones that should not be out on the street at all. And the state government has just failed them by not opening those facilities completely.
Unfortunately, we're picking up the slack.
And it gets. I go even further in saying this is a problem that has not been solved on the state or federal level because they don't know how, and it's been thrust on us. It's been pushed onto us as local governments to do because we deal with people. Those other organizations are used to dealing with big programs and try to make everything fit in a one-size-fits-all. This is something that's individual. So we'll get back on the slideshow here. Any other questions real quick?
Thank you, Mr. Myers. Can you remind me how many people, I think we do like a homeless count. I'm remembering the end of January just because it seems to be one of the coldest months, so it's probably the most accurate. What's our local count of?
The point in time count is what that's called, and it's a HUD requirement, state and federal agency, to go out one night, one day of the year, from dawn to dusk, and find the homeless in the community and count them. There's really been a lot of hesitation on how successful and valid that is. You've got to find them to count them. And that's one of the reasons why the county has switched to this homeless by name list, where they can actually get those people that are getting services and find how many people are declaring themselves homeless, and then not being able to duplicate that because they've got a name, so they can keep it from being duplicated, so it doesn't inflate itself. But it's actually grabbing those people as they come to try to get some of those services that they desperately need. So it's a little more effective. Our PIT counts have been around 35 to 40, somewhere around there. Our homeless by name list is 188. If you subtract out the youth in that number, it goes down to 132. And that doesn't count the ones that are homeless under the definitions that the McKinney-Vento program has under the school systems and on the federal program for McKinney-Vento. So in school systems, it's over 200 and reaching maybe even 4 or 3.5, 350. So those, and that definition is much broader. I mean, youth in that McKinney-Vento program can be homeless, but be living in a house with somebody who's not their legal guardian, or with a friend, or something like that. So much broader program and number, because they're trying to track, how are those kids moving around. The number that are being subtracted out from the homeless by name count, I believe, are more of those youth that are actually in families that are actually being recognized as homeless, and being pulled out that way.
One final question. You talked about this homeless by name being a regional feature. Is this going to be something where we're going to catch somebody from Portland? Oh, this name was recognized up in Portland, or is it just like a Lane County?
It's just Lane County, isn't it?
Yeah, Service Point is a Lane County. We have our own module, and so basically what you're going to get in that database that other providers like Community Sharing can see are the providers in the Lane County continuum of care.
Thank you. Those are my questions. Thanks.
We're going to have time for questions after.
Yeah. Taking the minimum action does not protect the quality of life in Cottage Grove. And I think that's really important that we want to point that out. If we do things to limit, if we just take care of the ordinances, it doesn't protect our parks so that everybody can enjoy them. It doesn't protect the use of the right of way. And it doesn't take any actions that can help get the people that are homeless in our community out of that situation of homelessness. So what we're proposing as a part of trying to get into that totality is do some of those ordinances, put those ordinances together, do those reasonable, objective things, but also try to approach it in a housing first model, and using a housing first and developing some of those alternative shelters that would be immediate and low barrier. So we're getting people into something that can get them stabilized and ready to start moving on, with a focus on exiting that house, that temporary shelter, as quickly as possible. Getting them into rapid exit services, getting them into permanent supportive housing or permanent housing outside of the sheltering system. That's the whole approach that we want to take. And so in doing that, I have this map and it shows what we're currently doing. The two little blue stars are the community center and city hall. We set up those systems to try to help prevent people from being in the parks and having some control, having some supervision, and being able to try to manage some of those homeless individuals that are in our community. It's been successful. We've sent 2 or 3 to other family members around the country where we start working with them, we get them cleaned up a little bit, and we find out some information about them. They make contact to a family member, and the family member says, hey, we're willing to take care of them and help bring them. We've bought them bus tickets. Some of the churches have bought them bus tickets, and community sharing, I think, has paid for some of the bus tickets to get them to their family support. That's a great tool to get people out of a shelter situation and get them into some rapid housing and get them out into the housing. That's been successful. We've gotten people jobs. Doesn't get them out into the housing because there's a 1.5 year wait for housing. And so they're still in the shelters. So the 2 blue stars are the community center and city hall. It has been a challenge. Supervising them is a full-time project. I think the police chief was out 3 times today telling some of our guests on the west side of the building here that everything you're doing we can hear inside the building. You need to mellow out and calm down and quiet. That would last for 25, 40 minutes and then they'd get noisy again. So we continually doing that. Teresa and Jessica, the same thing at the community center, constantly helping and assisting them, getting them to learn the rules, participate in the rules, and be a part of that. The other stars, the red star is our warming shelter site. So I just kind of wanted to put this on a map so people could see where everything is, especially for the town hall. Most of you know what these star places are. The dark purple, or the purple star that's down at the bottom of the map, is our Highway 99 site. That is the piece of property we purchased to put the road in, our street. It was the old radio station building. It's about, well, we'll tell you the size and stuff in a minute. I can't remember what it was. But it's down there on the south end of town. It's in the city limits, not very far. To us, it seems like a long ways because it's clear on the other side of town. But for people in larger cities, that's still downtown. So it's a good site that we wanted to point out. The other star is the orange star up towards the north on the map, and that is our Douglas Street property. That's the piece of property that we just purchased on 443 Douglas. It's 1.5 acres, and these are all things that we're using right now, or we want to try to move to use in our efforts to move into that housing first model. So our proposed plan, and this is the ideas that we've been visiting with and talking to others in homelessness and trying to figure out how to deal and how to get that little bit of assistance that we can to help with the totality that we can say we've got some sheltering going on and we've got some moving of people into housing, and we're also enforcing and protecting our other properties. First off, we need to decommission the shelter sites at the community center and city hall before May 1st. May 1st, our contractor is moving in with a job shack and piles of materials and forklifts and stuff to get up onto the roof of the community center to start that almost $1 million project. So we've got to get out of there. They're going to take up more than the space that we've been using for sheltering at the community center with all the materials and stuff. To do that, what we need to do is we need to open an temporary, immediate, low barrier shelter, 24-hour sheltering system somewhere in the community, and we're suggesting a warming shelter site. It will be closed at the end of March, and being able to use that as a temporary spot while we get another location prepared. The site would be managed by a third-party organization experienced in shelter management and the housing first model of getting people out of homelessness by trying to get them rapidly into some other kind of housing and get that permanent housing going in community members that way. And that would be probably from May to July. We think it's going to take about 2 months to get the Highway 99 site ready. To develop the regular immediate low barrier shelter site in consultation with housing, in consultation with the third party for housing 32 to 40 individuals in our community. We have 33 pallet shelters. So we have the 18 that are on the site right now at warming shelter, and we have 15 more coming from the state, from the county. So once that's developed, we would close the warming shelter site and move everybody from it to the new shelter site. They would be there, and then we'd move the remaining pallet shelters from the warming site to that low barrier site. Then the last 2 points, these two we've played around with, and I want to skip, I think we need to skip this next one, to assist in the development of second step transitional housing site, house 15 to 20 individuals that have stepped up from the immediate low barrier site to develop more responsibilities and as they prepare for placement in permanent housing. So this would be kind of your opportunity village place where it's a tiny home situation. They're self-governing, they've got rules, they're developing their responsibilities. I'm going to skip that step for now because after Friday, I met with Homes for Good, and we took them out to our Douglas site. And we need to, if we're going to be successful in any way, shape, or form, we have to get some permanent, very affordable to extremely low income, very low or extremely low income housing developed in this community. If we can shelter all we want, if we don't have any place for them to go, it's going to do no good. We have to get something developed to get that lowest end of housing available in the community. Those are things that just don't work in any kind of penciling out for a profit entity to try to do. I mean, it's terribly difficult to meet those. Homes for Good has done it, and they were out on the site on Douglas, and they were excited by the site. We'll get to that. So the warming shelter, and I'll kind of describe the sites. The warming shelter season ends.
Mr. Myers, can I interrupt for a second? Carrie, our organization has decided we are probably not going to apply for any RFPs, but should I declare a potential conflict of interest on this anyway? Our agency is currently providing the warming shelter. Provided somebody else actually applies, we have no intent to. So I hadn't considered it up to this point, but if nobody applied to it, I could see our agency stepping up. And so I guess I'm just kind of wondering how to navigate. Should we declare a potential conflict of interest?
Yeah, I agree that when this subject comes up every time, I would just reiterate for the record this possible potential conflict of interest if your employer ultimately chose to apply. So you're 2 steps away. You don't think they're going to apply. And
at this point, we have no intent to apply.
There's no intent. They're not even applying at this point. And even if you did, you're not guaranteed an award.
Right.
But it's old, I think.
Okay, so at this point, I work for a community sharing program, and I am declaring a potential conflict of interest on this matter. Thank you.
Good. And so the warming shelter site season ends March 31st. It's about 0.43 acres, and we have a great aerial view. They took it before we took them down last year. And so there's the shelters, the setup. It looks a little different today after the storm. It was Saturday. It lifted almost all of the canopies up and put holes in some, and the wind was vicious to that spot of town. The shelters have electricity installed, water and sewer connections on the site. If this warming shelter site is used as a temporary site to house those from the community center and city hall and more, because there'll be 17 units there, we'll have to bring the mobile shower over occasionally, probably once a week or something, in addition to being Wednesdays at the community sharing. They probably have to come over, but the connections are there. They can bring it over, hook it up, and use the facility. It was built to have that there. The use of the site will only be while the new immediate shelter is set up. Once the new shelter is set up, all the shelters here will be removed and moved to the new location. And the location could then be used. We're not going to decommission the electrical and water systems and everything there, because there's a potential for other events. BMD would really love to use this for their vendors, to either park their cars and their trucks with their freezers in it that are holding their food that they're selling in the park, other things like that. Talking with the chamber, there's the potential for some bazaars or holiday markets or something there. It could be a really cool little location right there in the park. So that was the intent in putting some of that infrastructure in, that it could be used for some of these other things. We could also, I mean, this is one of them we thought of as well. A bike group could come into town, tour group, and they could stay there and camp and use the electricity and then ride the trail or ride other rides around. So it could be a good asset. The shelter site on 99, this is the location that we'd be developing. It is about 0.59 acres. It has a house on it. It has restroom, shower, kitchen. It could be used for administration, counseling, training spaces, all of those needs that the third-party vendor would need there. Some of the remodeling that we would do is we're looking at taking the master bedroom in the back portion of the house and turning it into 2 ADA shower and restroom facilities in addition to the small bathroom that's there, and increase that capacity. There's room for 33 pallet shelters on the property. We've spaced them out so it creates a little village in there, a little ways away from the highway. All of the chain link fences all the way around the property. Part of it is already privacy screened in the fencing. We do that on the south side as well. It's not privacy screened yet. The neighbor has 5 very large and noisy dogs over there, so we definitely privacy screen that fence so that the dogs wouldn't be bothered by people on the property. We'd install the 15 shelters that are new that we'd be getting from the county, and then once those were all there and the improvements were made to the property, we'd move the warming shelter people over and close the warming shelter site. And then those warming shelter pallets would be moved over and installed in this location and used that way. The possible very low or extremely low income housing would be on the site on Douglas. Rather than building this site for a transitional step with only 15 to 20 spaces, after visiting with Homes for Good, we'd love to move forward with them and start securing some federal and state money to get this project off the ground. Property is currently zoned R2. And we could make the property available for Homes for Good to develop into those low-income housing units. They're currently building a site in Carlton. It is a 4-story building. It has 45 studio apartments in it for a supportive housing operation. Low end, very low, extremely low income, and it has facilities on the main floor to provide that counseling and other services that those individuals would need as well. As we looked at the property, that property in Eugene is 159 by 120 feet. This property is 360 feet by 208. We could probably put almost 4 of those buildings on this site. What we would suggest is building those, 1 or 2 of those buildings with Homes for Good on the far south side, which is next to the city shop and the little business there for Best Little Print House, their little shop building that they operate out of. And keep those higher density on that end. And as you move towards the manufactured homes that are on the north end, you put in tiny homes or some little townhouse development where you've got maybe a 1 or 2 bedroom units that would be low income for people to be in. So you gradually move and blend into the neighborhood. Homes for Good is the local county housing authority. They've been in the community for years. They aren't going anywhere. They manage a number of properties already in Cottage Grove. They do Riverview apartments across the river. They also do the Legion cottages. Have excellent capability of handling and doing this project. We have cleared the site, or we are in the process of clearing the site. If you went by it today, the house is down and almost gone. And we're cleaning up all the buildings and structures on the property, getting the trash from the property removed. We're leaving all of the fruit trees and other trees that are there on the site to try to keep them to see how those would fit into any development, because there's a wonderful, wonderful orchard and trees on the property. The steps we have right now is Senator Merkley and Senator Wyden have sent out their requests for direct spending. And we would like to move forward with putting in a joint direct request for spending for with Homes for Good in the city to get funding for constructing these buildings and constructing a project there that we could get maybe 60 units on the property or 70, some way that we could actually supplement our sheltering site and get closer to that 188 number and get more people into permanent housing. So that's one of the directions that we really want to try to move to. Ideal site for that that is centrally located in the community. Our public shelters will not be enough. Even building those permanent housing opportunities, having 33 units on the housing, the pallet shelters on the 99 property aren't enough to take care of the 188 or the 133. We've got to do something about youth. The city council has already participated with the rural program from Looking Glass, and they have a piece of property that they're trying to get funding for to develop and provide more services for homeless youth there. We want to encourage and help them as much as they can. They're the experts in handling youth. There's a whole gamut of other rules that apply to youth and homelessness and youth that they're the experts on, and we want to let them continue to do that. Any housing that we do build, it's going to take a couple of years to get it on the market and get it to where it can be occupied, but we've got to start now if we're going to get ahead. With the evictions going on, the economy going on, some of you may have heard about the possible sale of one of our mobile home parks in the community, very low-end mobile home park. That could create some vacancy, some people that don't have homes. Most of those mobile homes in that park are such that if they were evicted off their land, they can't take their home anywhere. No one will cite it. They don't meet any standards, and so they would end up being forced into homelessness. So we need to start getting a handle on how we're going to get people moving through that process. And I think what we've tried to do is create a plan that doesn't just provide free sheltering. I mean, that's not going to work. We've got to do something that starts moving them rapidly into some permanent assisted housing, and that's what we've tried to put together. There's other programs that we'd like to have help from, and these require other ordinances to allow private sheltering options, because we can't do it all by ourselves. Transitional housing and overnight camping, allowing churches, businesses, or individuals to step up and actually help with this as well. We've got some draft ordinances that we put together that would authorize us to create those, for us to create them or other organizations to create them, and establish some minimum health and safety requirements. Allows for privately managed transitional housing or campgrounds, and allow private property owners to apply for authorization for overnight camping on their property. For families, private residential property, to be able to apply to have somebody in a tent in their backyard or an RV in their driveway. And setting those requirements and restrictions so that there are some things that protect the neighborhood and protect the other users, but still allow that potential for somebody to help improve the situation for those people experiencing homelessness. That is our presentation that we want to try to kind of get some of that information out on for the town hall and start that discussion. Thoughts, questions?
We're going to need longer than 2 hours.
Yeah.
And like I said before, when we do this, we're starting at 7. I'll stay till 5 in the morning if we have to.
Yeah, we really have to this time. Yeah.
Councilor Stenton.
The potential site on the south end of town is Highway 99 the only way to access that stuff?
Right now, eventually our street will be pushed through, and one of the other pieces there is it does tie in really nicely to the South Lane Community Health Clinic as well, because you'd be able to access it off of our street and go right back there to the clinic, which would be a great opportunity for those staying at that shelter to start getting their health conditions under control. Once you get them stabilized in housing, they can start addressing and looking at some of those other issues that affect their lives. I mean, the person who passed away at the community center a couple months ago, housing was his first thing. I mean, he's got to find a place to stay and live, and he couldn't take care of his health issues. He had major health issues, diabetes and other things that were impacting him. he was ignoring those because he was constantly trying to struggle with housing. Once you get them housed, and that's the model, that's the first housing first model is you get that big issue taken care of housing, and then you can start addressing those other things that we often see and think, oh, homeless because of health issues or drug addictions or mental health issues, but a lot of those things have happened or exacerbated because of being unstable housing, and constantly worrying about who's gonna rip your tent up, who's gonna come and harass you, and the women homeless, terrible experiences, and some of them that we have at the community center. They have PTSD as a result of being in the homeless situation, that they've developed those crises and that survival mode just because of all of the things that are around them. One of our young men that lives in town that everybody knows constantly is sleeping in doorways and in like lit places because he's been beat up too many times. And those are really concerning things. That's what they're living with. They're not only trying to live with that and that housing, but they're living with these other challenges, and it just makes so many of their other challenges so much bigger.
It just seems dangerous to have people potentially walking 99 to get to that shop.
Yeah, the shoulders on 99 are pretty good until you get on the other side of the bridge. Then they open up for some of the apartments there and where the marble shop, the marble facility is. But yeah, you'd be walking along 99, but eventually we'll have the R Street, hopefully in about a year. It's not big and terrible, and there are other transportation means. Something Wheels can bring people out. The one vendor that we're looking at carry it forward, I believe, and Chris is on here. He'd be one of the people that at town hall, I think we're going to ask Chris to speak, or somebody can carry it forward, kind of talk about how they run their programs. But they have access to transportation as well, so we can get people in. But people are already using that route. There's a number of homeless that are staying on the property on the other side of 99, on the other side of the tracks, and using that site. So there are those potential. In a previous meeting we had earlier, a couple weeks ago, in going through this, Chris pointed out that he likes the 99 site. The warming shelter site is great because a lot of the improvements are already there. You don't have to put the electrical up for the power shelters. It's fenced, it's got all those pieces, but it's like putting the homeless in a zoo. These people have crisis, they have challenges that they're going to be facing. The person outside my window has difficulty recognizing that it gets really loud because he can't hear very well. They've got to relearn some of those skills and get themselves in control of some of the things that they just haven't had to control. And doing that inside a fenced compound in an area where everybody comes and walks by and goes by is like being in a zoo. Having them in a place where they are a little secluded, it's not that we're pushing them off to put them out of sight, but it gives them that opportunity to address some of those challenges that, hey, if they wake up in the middle of the night screaming and yelling, and staff has to come and help calm them down, they're not going to bother them, and they're not going to create a scene. So those are some of the benefits of the 99 site. The federally qualified health clinic, the house is an amazing feature to have there because it provides some of those resources that we have to build if we didn't have the house already.
Councilor Savage.
Thank you so much. Mr. Myers, if the project goes forward on Highway 99, is it my understanding that R Street can still punch through?
Yes.
So this doesn't hinder, you purchase the property to have R Street punch through.
Right.
And that can still happen, and this
We've
can be.
actually done the partition and lot line adjustment, and we've moved the line, and the fence has been moved. That's the new chain link fence with the privacy screen, and it is on the property, and the other side of the property is now R Street, will be R Street. So that's all been designated and lined out and surveyed and submitted to Lane County. So it's done, and the property that we'd be developing would be the piece that we would have sold if we hadn't held on to it for this kind of a project.
And it's my assumption that we would have sidewalks.
Yes, on our street we would have sidewalks.
The other question I had is I was thinking about different opportunities for housing, because if that's where this crisis has started, I know that other cities have done pre-approved ADUs, and somebody can simply buy the plans, hand them over to their contractor, and there's an ADU that they can build and have their sister-in-law come stay in the, whatever, however that works.
We have 2 plans that are on our website that are completely free that are already pre-approved.
That's rad.
We didn't do it. We saw Eugene's and said, hey, can we borrow yours? And they said, yes. And so we put them on our site. And then there are other plans on Eugene's website as well that cost, because it's an architect room and there's some protections and stuff, but you have to buy those. Those are also pre-approved. And so they could buy one of those other plans off of there for, I don't know what they are, $200, $300 or $50 or something. They're not ridiculous, but you could buy those. But we have 2 plans that are free, and they are pre-approved, and you could get those, and your permit, you go in and apply for your permit, you don't have to wait, and you're moving. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Councilor Irvin.
Questions. One, going off of your comments about, this is an unknown landscape. We're in a case law is being written right now, essentially. So questions surrounding that are, can you speak to how these cases are being tracked? I'm imagining a heat map with any time language for this particular case is referenced or used. Does that come up through a feed for you? Or how are we tracking this? How do we know real time what's working, what's not? We had the case of Grants Pass, but can you speak to how we're tracking this?
They are coming up. The ones that mean the most to me are the higher court decisions. So there's a proliferation of lower court decisions. It could be circuit court decisions. I don't know of any other district court decision. That's federal versus state courts. So the circuit courts are coming up. They're not reported. We can't read them. They're not available to us. We just know that Oregon Law Center, that's the activist group on behalf of people experiencing homelessness. So they're jumping in and either, I don't want to say threatening communities, working with communities on problematic enforcement practices, or simply suing in circuit court. So I haven't seen those. I just know that it's happening. And then the higher level decisions would be an appellate court, the Court of Appeals here in Oregon. I don't think that there's a reported decision yet. So we are tracking them, but it is slow. It's a slow process. Bringing a lawsuit is just getting it to court can take 2 years. And as you saw, this is a 2019, 2020. We probably won't get word from the Ninth Circuit on the Blake versus Grants Pass case for another 2 years.
And is it true to say that this is specific to the Ninth Circuit's ruling, since the effect, can any rulings be made prior to this?
Martin v. Boise.
To 3115, that doesn't go into effect, so we don't know anything about that particular
Right.
And nothing could be brought until that goes into effect.
Right.
Okay.
And I also want to point out there's another source of monitoring with the League of Oregon Cities. It's got a page specifically for homeless solutions, and they are constantly updating that with new information and new studies that are being done and new efforts that are going on throughout the state, with examples, samples, where some communities are working on reasonable objectiveness and ordinances, and those kind of things as well. So that's another resource, and it's actually turned out to be a really great resource. It's still being built, so it's continuing to grow, but you can get to that off of the Oregon League of Cities homepage if you go to the resources and go to the references there, homeless solutions.
So just so you know, they also are developing model code language that has yet to be released.
League of Oregon Cities.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I'm curious if you have any more insight into the mechanism. I imagine in a digital age, there could be a a code written to crawl cases for keywords or key legislation. Do you know of anything that's publicly available, or is this all going to be channeled through attorneys associations in New Oregon City? Like, is there anything where we could go and just track what's happening in real time? And I guess, who's the we that can't look at circuit courts?
I would just track the league. Any decision that comes out, they're going to be announcing it. They will have it as part of their background to what's been successful, what hasn't been successful. But I have to tell you, so attorneys in different jurisdictions are a little skeptical of circuit court decisions in other jurisdictions because our judges are totally different. And so one thing that would be enforceable or upheld in Southern Oregon, for example, I can tell you wouldn't be upheld in the Lane County Circuit Court. And so there's no precedential value unless and until it goes to the Oregon Court of Appeals.
That's confidence inspiring in the justice system. There was a slide on there where there was a proposed change to the code, section J, I believe, of a prohibition within 100 feet of a school or a park. Can you speak to the justification of that and why 100 feet is the cutoff?
And that, the 100 feet was just for on-street community is where that was in the roadway use. And it could be one of those in the community parks as well during the daytime where maybe you can say in all parks, maybe within a playground or something.
I guess speak to why would that be a good idea?
Just for safety purposes. I mean, or at least peace of mind for people. It's one of those that, would citizens in the community like to have a row of tents right next to the playground?
And so I guess that this is all would have to pass the test of interpretation of reasonable.
Right. Does imposing that limitation in that area, that specified area, leave other areas open so that you have alternatives?
So Bohemian Park, for example, we said you can't be within 200 feet. So that would mean that you have to be 200 feet away from the playground. You still got space in Bohemian Park to use because the park is big enough. But if you went to Westland Park, where the park is basically all playground, but you couldn't. But that's okay because maybe that's where you don't want homeless to have to be in the wood chips on the playground.
I mean, as a parent, I would interpret that to say, kids, you're only allowed to play on the playground because that's your safe distance from those who we don't have any control over what may happen, what they may expose you to. I would just make a statement that seems like the whole park should be.
And that's why I just threw those out. We put it in here, community, neighborhood, and mini parks, the whole parks, but you could do more of that where you're saying you can't be within. And you can do that during the day. It's the other option. You can't be in these parks at night, but during the daytime, you can't set up any camp or within some of the people. Yeah.
Another one is an observation. I think I know the reasoning, but it's just we're just juxtaposing this with the road conversation we just held, and that whole focus for funding was taxpayer to get this funded. I have not heard tax the taxpayer once in any of these proposals, and that just stands out. I think I understand why. I think it's correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it's because there is more awareness or financial support from federal, state, and county levels towards this issue. Because it's especially when I hear a regional approach, questions are, well, who are these players in the region? I'm assuming Lane County. Who else? What communities are resistant to this approach? What is this coordinated direction of a regional approach? Who's at the helm? And yeah, how are we in lockstep with what's being proposed here, with what that regional plan is? How much feedback is? I know we're going to do a town hall, but what is this communication mechanism that's going back and forth? I have others, but
I could probably address some of those things. So Lane County is the community action agency for our area. So when federal dollars they're the continuum of care under HUD. And so they have the Poverty and Homelessness Board that is doing that. I'm actually now appointed to that as of, I think, 2 months ago or 3 months ago. They were looking for a rural elected representative for years because my agency was funded from a different arm of the Human Services Commission, but from the county, they said, I probably shouldn't be on that, but I guess they were struggling to find representatives. So they said I could go on it. I just have to recuse myself anytime, our agency or related issues come up. But that group works regularly. In fact, Chris McAllister, who's online, actually is chair of that committee right now, and is also with Carry It Forward. And I think his input will be invaluable into the discussion at our town hall, because I think that is that connection that I think you're looking for. The Human Services Commission is it's a partnership right now between Lane County, Eugene, and Springfield, where Eugene is putting in a huge amount of money, and still, as we were talking about, doesn't have all that's necessary. There is a TAC report, Technical Assistance Collaborative, I believe is what that was, a group that they hired, the HSC hired, to come up with a plan to end homelessness. And so I would certainly recommend, I think Richard can forward to the council that TAC report.
That is December 8th memo and packets that we talked about. So TAC report is included in that.
So there is more information than we could chew in a month's time available. So I'm happy to point folks to that, because it actually will talk about housing first, and the successes that have happened. The whole, and Richard's done an excellent job, as, pardon me for saying so, a layperson, to describe to you what these folks are doing every day. But I would welcome and encourage everybody that's interested to read some of this information, because it really talks about those pieces. And I think the rural pieces absolutely need to start becoming a bigger player in this. Which is why I'm getting involved in that level.
Some of the other collaboration is as we partner with that third party to run it, and if we choose Carry It Forward, they're a part of other things going on in other parts of the county. So they know that, hey, this is happening in Eugene or Springfield, or hey, here's some grants that are coming open, or here's the directions and some of the challenges we're facing up there. How can we address and make sure those don't happen in Cottage Grove? So a lot of that is Homes for Good is another prime example. We move with St. Vincent de Paul or Square One Village. All of those are working as throughout the county, and anytime we get involved with one of those, we're naturally being pulled into that collaborative approach as well. So we're not creating our own stuff down here. We're actually trying to pull some of those organizations that are having success. And Square One Village is a great example, because they've already had success in Cottage Grove as well. And well, St. Vincent too, with Corey Commons and Homes for Good with theirs. So they're all here and they've done stuff. We just need to try to and to help push more opportunities for them to be down here and collaborate with us.
Any other?
I have a question, Mr. Mayor, which is simply that this is, as I tried to explain at the beginning, it's a 3-tier layer of law. And to the extent that you can give me guidance or us guidance on what would help clarify this for the public, what worked in this presentation and what doesn't work, what should we drop, what should we focus on, what should we develop more, that would be really helpful, because we're trying to explain to the public the situation you're in and to take that off your shoulders to some extent.
Councilor Irvin, then Councilor Stanton.
That reminded me of another data point that I was looking for, but I don't know how we would get to it exactly, but it would be helpful. We have data points through the Eco Northwest study about median incomes, and I think generally what rents are, so we can understand where the lacks are in that chart that was put up there. What I don't think we have is an assessment of the existing homes and dwelling spaces in Cottage Grove and their associated either mortgage amounts or rents. I know those can fluctuate because part of the justification, for instance, for the MUFTI that I believe in, but I don't have a way to justify with data exactly, is that even if you build medium to higher income housing, that there is some stock of existing low income housing that people can graduate up from. That's just a theory that seems to make sense, because how do we know what's affordable here? How do we know what people are paying? How can we support that? And that seems like a pretty vital thing to know when it comes to deciding whether or not we do some sort of a housing stimulus that promotes a certain income level or not. Is there anything like that out there? Do we have a way to get to that?
The first thing is the housing needs analysis. That's exactly what they did to get to that point of determining what houses are needed in the community, what spectrum how many across the spectrum are needed. Because they did that evaluation they didn't look at every single property, but they looked at a statistical number on them and said, hey, here's what we've got in this market, here's what we've got in this market, and how those break out. So that's there.
But was that a metric off of what people make?
Yeah, because they tied it to the median family income, as well as the actual property values and what they're living in, and how much of that, what percentage of that median factor family income that they're actually spending on homes, or their income that they're spending on homes. Because that's and those are the other sides of that too. Even plus both of them, is they compared that percentage of what people are spending on their household income and how that affects where they're living and homelessness. So, yeah, but we can see if we can find more details here that we can pull out and get data point on some of that. But you're right, and the housing that's going on, the new multifamily housing units that are being built in Harrison Village, for example, they're in that middle income to maybe even high income level. But they're definitely going to pull some people who are in lower income housing, but really don't need to be. They could be in the middle. And that should open up some. It's just a basic principle of economics, your supply and demand. How much that's going to be, it's not going to be a huge amount, but anything we can do that increases that supply is going to help reduce that pressure on the price. The challenge is, it is a global price. I mean, when the piece of plywood costs $90 in Cottage Grove, it also costs $90 everywhere else. And even though our demand for housing may go down because we've got supply, the materials to build it are still going to be expensive. So it's impacted a little bit, but not a lot.
So trying to tie these two things together with the county regional approach, state, in my pea brain, it makes sense to not just infill, but to expand out. And I know we have goals, land use goals and everything like that. If the studies are saying that this is the leading factor in homelessness, what is being done to address availability of buildable lands and F2 in different designations?
Yeah, and the housing needs analysis looks at that. We have for land right now inside the urban growth. So the land is there to meet our need up until 2038. It's just the houses aren't on it, and we're not getting those pieces of property into the market to develop. And so trying to encourage that, and that's why I've been going around with Homes for Good to visit property owners that are decent-sized pieces of property to see if we can get.
People don't just want to live in town. Like people, my family is trying to buy properties that they can't build on, that they can't add to the housing stock.
Councilor Stannett.
I mean, mentioned, asking for direction with regard to the town hall. I think the town hall, think the balance and the give and take in the town hall is important. I think a lot of the people who are going to take the time to come to the town hall are going to want to make their views known, perhaps even irrespective of what we might have to tell them. I think the trick will be giving them enough information to have a productive conversation. I think we wanted public input, but we wanted to inform what we're going to have to do. And I think that's, I think tonight's presentation drew on a lot of what we've already talked about, went a little deeper than what we've already talked about. I don't think you're going to be able to go that deep with the general public in order to get something back from them that we can use to do what we have to do. Maybe. Okay. Or simplify. I don't know. I mean, sorry.
You go ahead.
I just think, to the extent that we're telling people much, it's going to be helping create a playing field where we can get useful give and take.
Councilor Fleck.
I guess I would just want to say that I think you did an excellent job of showing what the law is. This is the bare minimum you could do, and this is what we propose you do. I think that's awesome because, Eugene had the unhoused sleeping in parking strips in front of neighborhood homes. I don't want to see that in Cottage Grove. I don't think that's good for the homeowner. I don't think that's good for the unhoused person. So I do think at a bare minimum, we need to look at what is it that we have to do, and then what is it could we do. And I really love the whole point that you're making about the reasonable, it wasn't accommodation, what was the word?
I'm like, objectively reasonable.
Objectively reasonable.
Sorry, my brain's turning off.
I'm tired too. But I mean, I think that that's a really good thing to say. Yes, we could tighten up here, but does that make us too close in jeopardy, of running afoul of, this court case and the laws? And, I also believe we need to, once again, we set up here to represent all citizens. From the residents to the residents that are seniors, the residents that have children, the residents who happen to be unhoused. I mean, we represent all of those folks. And so what we have to do is come up with a compromise that's going to make sense for everybody within the laws that we have. And I thought your approach was awesome.
Councilor Savage.
Thank you so much, Mr. Mayor. I'm going to echo actually what both of the previous councilors were saying. I think Councilor Stennett was spot on talking about the balance. There has to be a little bit of give and take, maybe take some stuff out and have folks ask the questions that need to be answered. It's not that you left it out. It's that the act of asking the question is validating that you are hearing them. And then kind of what I gleaned from Councilor Fleck is producing your proposal in a way that can be understood. There's so much meat that simplifying it in a way that it could really be understood by somebody who has no idea the depth of why we're having to go this deep to have this conversation, and trying to bring somebody down to that depth is going to swallow them whole. So producing it in a way that is understood and meaningful and creating that conversation, I think will be really helpful, and doing a lot of listening and responding, and instead of forward projecting, this is da 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 da, it could be creating that conversation to create that interaction. But I'm also going to echo what Councilor Fleck said. This was an incredible presentation, and I appreciate the time that you guys have spent putting into this, and the time that you're spending going into April 5th. I think it's really important, and I think it's really valuable, and I appreciate it. Thank you.
Any more?
I'll try to make it quick. Curiosity. one of the thoughts that came up was like, how does this ruling impact the condemning of houses, right? If you have an argument that someone needs to have their blankets and their tent and things that support them from the elements, and like, well, that wouldn't meet the minimum requirements for housing for someone that owns a home that, maybe the water is shut off or something like that, and they would get kicked out or they would be evicted or something like that. Like, have any cases come up on that where it's now challenging these laws are challenging our ability to enforce other code?
No, because this doesn't affect the right to eject people from your own private property, and the Fifth Amendment protects the private property rights, and so private real property rights. And so a homeless individual, so I think the two prongs you're talking about is this impacting people's private real property rights? No, because they get to keep people off of their properties. Businesses can eject people, can trespass people off of their doorsteps. And then a person experiencing homelessness who is inhabiting a certain area has no real property interest in that area.
I don't think I made myself clear. We were just talking about a house, I think, up on Mount David area that we're talking about possibly condemning, right? That's what I'm talking about. How can we condemn a place that would be more sheltered than a tent and a blanket?
Oh, you mean would condemnation be for a public interest?
Yeah. And kick people out.
And to be real honest, that was a discussion that we had as we were looking at that piece of property, because at one point there were 6 or 8 people living in the property, and what were we going to do? Well, we had certain people carry guns, go out there, and then we're only 6, then we're only 5, 4, because 2 of them got taken away. But yeah, it's when we looked at that piece of property and some of the parameters associated with it, the danger that it creates and the danger it was creating for the neighborhood were the pieces that we were really looking at, that there were some real hazards that were being created there as a result of that dangerous building. So, I mean, you're right. I mean, it was a dilemma that we were facing. Yeah, if we do this, these people are going to be out of this home. They're all out now, and so the house is empty. Just natural attrition to either housing in some place with bars or stuff like that happened as a result. But it's how do you look at some of that? But we've got to look at those too, because that housing stock you really don't want to have in your neighborhoods. I mean, the neighbors have been living with that for a year or more, and it's
the neighbors around the community center, and as well the neighbors essentially around the other areas.
Yeah. And that's why we're trying to get that moved into a different location where it's better controlled and managed 24/7 with people that know how to do it. We've got to get into those positions where we can actually manage and mitigate those issues. Yeah.
Okay, move on. Okay, concerns of council.
I just got them out.
I actually had a laundry list of stuff, but we've been here so long, I think I'll wait. I mean,
I just got a couple I wanted to hit. I should hit this at the beginning. It's Happy Pie Day.
Yeah.
That one.
And
I had pie and ice cream all waiting for me. So.
I had my first Oregon Mayor's Association board meeting on the 4th, and it was interesting. We had and I had a meeting prior with Ted Wheeler before that, Mayor of Portland. He came and zoomed into our board meeting, and he worked with a group of mayors to try to get 8 cities funded for $50 million for homelessness. And they got 25. And he asked the Oregon Mayor's board to create a task force, and he voluntold his staff they will support the task force. And so I've got the mayor of Dayton, the mayor of Fossil, and the mayor of Warrenton working on to get a region of people throughout Oregon to sit on that task force along with the board and Ted Wheeler. And so we're going to try to come up with some good numbers to take to legislative next year. And you can't just ask for $50 million and address homelessness without a plan. and we're probably going to ask for like 100 million, but we're going to have a plan of this is why we need the 100 million. So I think that's going to be a really a good thing for the collaboration of the mayors around the state. And had a mayor's roundtable last Thursday with Lane County mayors, and we talked about homelessness and infrastructures. And you know, Eugene's sitting with 3,000 homeless, and they got like 1,200 beds. So they're not housing everybody that they have. And last thing I wanted to talk about was last Thursday, Mr. Stewart and Bruce McDonald come up to Weyerhaeuser and looked at the picnic area and got some good pictures, and they're trying to develop a plan, but we're going to get that Pioneer Park replaced. And so we will move on to business from city manager.
Just a couple of items real quick. One is the tree giveaway coming up on April 2nd from 9 to 3. We have over 1,000 trees to give away through the grant that was received by the Urban Forestry Commission. So please pass it around, share. You got a flyer. Everyone who gets their water bill had a little flyer in their water bill. So we're encouraging people to come. They're going to have some great trees. Eric's not on here anymore, but I put in some good words for trees that I want. So hopefully and actually other people said, yeah, some dogwoods, hopefully. They're trying to find some nice maples, things that will fit in an urban environment. We have had donated some sequoias, giant sequoias. We will reserve those for places that they will actually work in and not create a problem someday. But yeah, there are some trees to give away. And so please share that with others, bring kids, come down and pick up trees and get them planted in our community. The last item is, don't forget the town hall. The town hall Tuesday, April 5th. Pass that around, share that with people, and do it at the Armory. We still have to figure out some of the logistics to make the Armory work, but we'll get there on that and have a great night there. So
can we have like a blurb to distribute on that?
Yeah, we're gonna be doing and maybe this was some of the thoughts that can we simplify this and pull some of this out. We may be taking some pieces of this presentation and actually making them into things that will be posted on social media so that we can put those out and get some of that information out before the town hall to help spread that word, and then we don't have to go into them as much during the town hall. Or maybe it brings questions to the meeting as well. So yeah, we'll get some blurbs out. We're going to start doing that and pushing that with some promotion and stuff. We'll get them out and share them with you so you can pass them around as well.
Business from the attorney.
Things to say, but I'm like, the first is I just want to reassure you all, there's been lots of questioning as to whether your city has been complying with the law. And I can just assure you that staff and our office work constantly to ensure that what the city is doing is in compliance with the laws with regard to all of the changing landscape that's happening right now: homelessness, pandemic, restrictions, mandates, all of those things, and ethics. And so I appreciate it tonight. We had 3 examples of counselors knowing, being aware of their ethical obligations. And it's a narrow area, right? Oregon ethics is a little different than what a layperson would think it is. It's, are you experiencing a financial benefit or a financial detriment? You, a relative, your business that employs you. And I just loved having that opportunity to illustrate when it comes into play and how you comply with it. Richard called earlier today just to double check because he was aware of certain circumstances. And so again, just keeping you in line is our job, and you guys do a wonderful job listening and following through. So thank you. Now, I'll see you on the 5th.
Okay, there's no items removed, so it brings us to item 13, executive session. City Council of Cottage Grove will now meet in executive session to consider information or records that are exempt by law from public inspection. The executive session is held pursuant to ORS 192.6602D, which allows council to meet in executive session to deliberate with persons designated by the governing body to carry on labor negotiation. Representatives of news media and designated staff should be allowed to attend the executive session. All other members of the audience are asked to leave the room, and the representatives of news media are specifically directed to not report on any of the deliberations during executive session, except to state the general subject of the session as previously announced. No decision will be made in executive session. At the end of executive session, we will return to open session. Council may take action before adjourning the meeting.
So we're going to mute ourselves and turn off the cameras and the others that are on here. You can hang around because you won't be able to see or hear anything, but
Do we got to turn that outside off? Okay, so we're back in regular session. So, Mr. Myers.
You have before you, we talked about in executive session, a new bargaining agreement with the Police Guild here in Cottage Grove. We've conducted negotiations and the unit has ratified the agreement as a result of those negotiations. It basically represents some changes to holidays, that time off or in lieu of holidays, and those that have to schedule on certain holidays by adding Independence Day. We adjusted some of the accrual rates for vacation. There was some cleanup language that was done as a result of changes in state law. And basically the big piece was the salary adjustments that for the first year of the contract beginning in July 1 of 22, there would be a 3% market adjustment followed with a CPI adjustment of between 2% and 4%. And in the following 2 years, a 1% and 5% adjustment on the CPI. Dispatchers increased their certain premium for DPST from 2.5 to 3.5 to make them equal to the police officers. And there were some slight adjustments in the FTO longevity by creating a 1% match if the employees put 1% in on the 5-year, and increasing the second language annual bonus. Comp time maximum accruals moved from 80 to 100, and we made some slight adjustments for the food allowance to increase food costs. And it's a 3-year contract, and so now it's before the council to decide if they wish to support the approval of that. So we have one of our 3 bargaining units approved for July 1, 2022.
What would be the appropriate motion on that?
That you approve
the ratified.
You authorize the city manager to enter into and sign the collective bargaining agreement with the police guild.
So moved.
Second.
Got motion on second. Is there any discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. Long meeting. We're adjourned.